Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today's guest is David Wolfe. David Avocado Wolfe is a speaker, author, biodynamic organic farmer, earth activist, peak performance coach, and adventurer. He is best known for his work and expert advice in superfoods, longevity, and, of course, chocolate, as well as being the celebrity spokesperson for the NutriBullet. David is the founder and president of the non-profit The Fruit Tree Planting Foundation charity, which has a mission to plant 18 billion fruit, nut, and medicinal trees on Earth.
Hi, everybody. There's nothing more fun for me than spending time with someone that's well-studied, open-minded, deeply spiritual, successful in their work, that deeply cares for people and Mother Earth. And that is definitely David Wolfe. Get ready to experience one of the deepest, most fun, engaging, expansive, wild rides you'll ever go on with David Wolfe and I. In this deep, passionate dialogue, and it's more of a sharing than an interview, David and I dive deep into issues such as good and evil, God, religion, Rudolf Steiner's teachings, natural foods, planting trees, the use of plant medicines, and more. I really love spending time with David Wolfe and the deep, heartfelt dialogue we shared, and I'm confident you're going to enjoy the ride right down the rabbit hole with us. If you love this amazing experience, please share it widely so we can all wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up together. People and Mother Earth need our inspiration now more than ever. Enjoy. Well, welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today I have a very exciting and interesting guest for you, David Wolfe. David Wolfe is somebody I first heard about actually from my buddy Rory, who's sitting in the next room, who I've been hanging around with for probably, a long time, probably since I had a lot of hair on my head. And, for those of you that don't know David, he's probably been to 1 million conferences. He's well known in a variety of areas. Probably the raw food movement is where he's most, recognized. But he's also family with Shervin Jaffariah, who is the founder of Symbiotica, who we have done a podcast with, you may have listened to and hopefully enjoyed a lot, because Shervin's always fun to talk to. So, David, welcome to Heaven House and Living 4D with myself, Paul Chek.
Thanks for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and we share so much in common that I'm excited to get into this and dig as deep as we can in the short time that we have together.
Yeah, well, we have a little bit of time. I'm not into the fluffy surface podcasts. I like to kind of dive in and, get something so that we can get a sense of the meat and the potatoes of a subject. So I'd love to start by, if you could give us an encapsulation of how your life led into raw foods, alternative health, and growing your own food, because I saw, doing some research on you, you have a couple of degrees, and like one was political science and one was law, which are a long way from the garden. So how did all that come about?
Geez, wow. Well, it started in Seaside Heights, New Jersey.
Wow.
Most well known for the Jersey Shore TV show.
Okay.
But I was born there, and I was born there first. So in that area of the world, we're down a river from the Ciba-Geigy chemical plant, as I later found out.
Oh.
I was born next door to the Ciba-Geigy chemical plant in Toms River General Hospital, which is one of the most carcinogenic chemical plants in North America. And so I was born really right in the midst of all that. So that plays into the story later. Both my parents are medical doctors.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And they met in medical school in Missouri, of all places. My dad's from New York. My mom came from Tehran.
Oh.
So, because, Shervin's Persian. I'm half Persian. My mom's Persian.
So are you guys linked through your mother?
Through our mothers.
Okay.
Yeah. And so anyway, what ended up happening is we grew up there, but we went back and forth to Iran quite a bit at that time. This is in the early 70s, before all of that chaos occurred. And I pretty much grew up maybe the first year and a half of my life. Even though I was born in the United States, I grew up in Iran for the first year and a half of my life. Mm-hmm. And my first language was Farsi.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, Rumi's language.
Yeah. It's a gorgeous Indo-European language. Even though it has the Arabic alphabet, it's actually Indo-European in origin, similar to French and German and English.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Very similar to Italian.
Wow.
So the interesting thing there was that when the Shah got overthrown, we had to flee the country. Mm-hmm. And so we came back to the United States for good, even though we had lived here a lot of the time. We were here for school years, for example, when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, etc.
Yeah.
And growing up in New York City and Toms River, New Jersey, and Seaside Heights, it was like the Twilight Zone, because I'd go into New York City and it was like all the kids on the block, and great times with all the local kids learning how to box and learn how to build snow forts and all this crazy stuff. And then we go back to New Jersey, and we're on the Jersey Shore, so that place only had people in it in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like Twilight Zone. We would run. We knew everybody's backyards. We knew everybody's house. They weren't there.
Right.
5 houses probably out of every 6 or 7 were empty most of the year.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting place. And then when I was a real young kid, probably about 5, and some of my earliest memories were renegade planting. I used to sprout pine trees and then plant them in people's yards.
That's great. I never heard of that before.
I never really actually told anybody that for many, many years, really until recently. Then one day I realized, that is part of my life, and that's part of who I am, and it's part of what I did as a kid.
Yeah.
And it's part of my life because today we run a fruit tree planting foundation where we plant. Last year we planted 80,656 trees in 2019, and then we've planted 1 million trees since 2002.
So I'm actually sitting with the reincarnation of Johnny Appleseed.
I really am a Johnny Appleseed, and I love hanging out with many other Johnny Appleseed like-minded kind of people. And they ended up running my foundation, and they're still running it today. We're having great success with it. We just did the last final planting on the Big Island of Hawaii of 100 trees.
Wow.
That was super fun.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid growing up, I saw so much because my dad's office, and my mom worked in that office, and people would come in high on drugs or drunk, wreck their motorcycle, need to be stitched up immediately or they would die. They couldn't make it to Toms River General Hospital. It's 20 miles away.
Wow.
So I saw that kind of stuff as a kid. Broken bones, how to fix broken bones before the age of plates, needles, rods,
Right.
screws, all the stuff that they have now. And it gave me a real perspective on medicine, and that's one of the reasons why I'm in the position that I'm at today, is because I saw the failures of medicine. I saw the successes, but I also saw the failures.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, about 14 years old, we got into nutrition as a hobby. I started growing avocado trees on my first visits to my uncle's farm here in San Diego
Yeah.
in 1978.
A lot of them here.
We're in Avocado Central over here.
Yeah. There's what's cool too is a lot of people don't know this, but coyotes love avocados.
Oh, absolutely. And dates.
Yeah, they eat a lot of stuff because they poop all over the property here, and you can see what's in their poop, and it's half the time full of seeds. I'm like, these guys are like total nature masters.
They're truly omnivores.
Yeah.
They really are. The coyote, a dog, can survive on anything.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. You know how I grew up here in Southern California after we left New Jersey in 1980 when I was 10 years old. And we had been coming to my uncle's ranch, so I was familiar with it. But we grew up with the coyotes. We grew up with the local flora and fauna in the canyons here, and the white sage of the canyons of Southern California. Those things are deep within us, me and my cousin and my family. And it's just something that's always been a part of my life is, bringing the gifts, the botanical gifts of your environment out to the world.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. It's, I've talked about this on my podcast before, but I think it's appropriate right now. And that is, the British chef Jamie Oliver.
Yes.
He goes around the world showing children flashcards, and he's got a mix of common fruits, vegetables, and farm animals and corporate symbols. And he surveyed and showed that about 90% of kids don't recognize common fruits, vegetables, and farm animals, but they get 100% of the corporate symbols. The reason I'm bringing that up is because, we've gotten so up into our heads and so disconnected from the earth that we don't, people, when I say we, I mean people in general, they don't even know where food comes from. They think it just magically appears in a supermarket. But if anything was to ever shut the electricity off, people would be utterly fucked. In other words, it takes people like you to kind of keep bringing the ancient wisdom forward, which, would be horticultural wisdom, which became farming wisdom. But today, people are so disconnected even from farming concepts. It's unbelievable.
It really is. It's really
dangerous.
It's alarming. It's alarming to me. And it has always been very deep in me. Farming, horticulture, wild food. It's part of my, I was born a black sheep of the family.
Mm-hmm.
I was the one outside eating weeds. Everybody looked at me like, what is this guy doing? And then I would just hide it. I wouldn't even show people. Like, for example, my whole pine tree growing operation, no one ever saw it. not even my brothers.
Wow.
So, that's, we learn, I think, in this culture that if you're different, I think you and I are pretty different than the normal, I would guess.
Yeah.
That's my hypothesis at this point.
I'm pretty different. I mean, I have 2 wives and practice shamanic healing and read energy fields and build water chargers and paint and dance and sing and vaporize and talk to God all day.
Well said.
Instead of reading books that tell you what God wants, I just say, let's just see what God has to say about it.
Well said.
Yeah.
We share that. I live in a perpetual state of communion with nature.
Yeah.
And that's one of the hardest things for me about traveling so much is that I'm disconnected from my farms and I'm disconnected from my favorite trees and plants and even my favorite animals. So when I was about 18, 19 years old, I realized I had allergies to dairy products. Yeah. That's when I started going, there's something's wrong here, especially cow dairy. And that's what woke me up. And then that eventually led me to vegetarianism, veganism, experimenting with all different kinds of diets, wild food eating, raw foodism, superfoods, super herbs. And then eventually you kind of settle into what's the right thing for your metabolism, right? Which for me is vegetarian diet. But that's not the right thing for everybody, as we know.
Yeah.
And it's just how I settled into what I like to live on, and the herbs and the superfoods and the great things that I love to hunt down in nature, like spring water, are just intimate day-to-day experiences that I love to share with people and would love for people to know about.
Yeah. It's amazing. I remember when I was doing research on 5-MeO DMT and found that one of the highest concentrations of it is in a grass called Phalaris. And it's the wild grass that grows out of the cracks in the streets and the sidewalk when you're walking down the streets in places like New York. And I'm like, Jesus, God's sense of humor is unbelievable.
It's the cosmic giggle. Yeah. Absolutely. The cosmic giggle rings through, the galactic chuckle. It pierces all.
Yeah, it does.
And Phalaris, this is interesting because, as I got older and got out into the world, I wanted to farm in Hawaii because I'm super into tropical plants and all the great things you can grow there, and cacao and vanilla and all those things that I love. But I also wanted to farm in the ecosystems that I was familiar with in upstate New York. And it ended up in Ontario. And the wild grass that grew all over the front yard in Ontario, as we later confirmed and found out and repeatedly confirmed over and over again, is Phalaris grass.
Yeah, you're walking on a DMT factory.
It's amazing.
Yeah. If you were able to synthesize your philosophy of life into a paragraph or two, what would it be?
Well, today is the best day ever. Today is the best day ever. Today is all we've got.
Yeah.
You've got to make today the best ever because you don't have tomorrow, and tomorrow's never going to arrive. Yesterday's gone forever. So it's a moment to moment connection with the direction of the day, which is, this is the best ever. Now, it's not the best. Notice the changing in the phraseology there. It's not the best day ever. It's not the best day. It's the best day ever. So the ever is a very interesting word because that turns it over to a higher power. There's an automatic built-in faith into it. If you really pay attention to that phrase, like, today's the best day ever, today's the best day ever, you're turning that over to a higher power to go, oh, it's the best ever? Oh, what about this? Boom. How about that? You want to know what the best ever is? Look at this. And that's the magic of it. And that's what's made me a faithful person.
Yeah.
Because I've said that it started out when I was maybe 15 or 16 years old. Today is the best day ever.
That's cool.
And it's been with me my whole life. And it's interesting. That's why I have faith, because I know it works.
It reminds me of a mantra. When I used to be a competitive triathlete and I was the Army's representative in the national championships in Hilton Head in '86, but I did a lot of hard training. I also fought on the Army boxing team at the same time as I was representing the Army in triathlon, which was a lot of training every day. But I needed something to help me deal with the pain, so I just came up with this mantra. And my mantra, yours is today is the best day ever. Mine was, God is great, God is good, help me to do what I should. And so I would just chant that over and over and over again. And when you're pushing yourself really hard for hours at a time, bringing yourself into harmony with the resonant vibration of something deep, meaningful, and connecting, which for me, I'm not talking about a religious God that'll burn you in hell. I'm talking about the source and the sum of all that is, the mystery. And, my chant was, God is great, God is good, help me to do what I should, meaning help me live in ways that, if emulated by other people, would bring more good or beauty to the world. And so even as an athlete, I always felt that it was my job to fully express myself and tap my potential. So it's neat that we both have our own little mantra.
You have to have a mantra in your life that connects you to a source that's greater than you.
Well, I was going to say too, when you mention the word faith, I tell my students faith begins where knowledge ends. But the thing, you're surrounded by a lot of books. You've only seen a little bit of them. I don't know if you just see the rest of the library.
I've seen, last time I was here, I saw some of your library over there in the other room.
And Penny's office is full of them too. And I got lots of them at home. But, I really love to study. But the point I'm getting to is that the more you study, the more you realize you don't know. And so what I've found is that my studies have given me concepts, which then I put into practice, and they either bear fruit or they don't. And if they don't, then that's called empirical science. You say, well, maybe that worked for somebody, but it isn't working for me. And you keep digging, you stay on the treasure hunt. But I've found, the more I study, the more mysterious everything gets, right? You look, here we are talking about walking on wild grass, not realizing that we're standing on one of the most powerful psychedelics in the world that's an entheogen, a God molecule. And, so the more you look into things, honestly, the more mysterious it gets, because bigger ideas just lead to bigger questions. I found myself forever being baffled, right? Just going, okay, I thought I knew what was going on here, but now I realize I don't. And so that's where faith begins. It's like, okay, I followed the yellow brick road or the breadcrumb trail, and it brought me to here. And when I don't know what to do, I just ask my soul, my heart, my inner self, where do I go from here? And I just feel the impulse. All of a sudden, the urges to turn left or to look up or whatever it might be. And magic just keeps happening. And I think that's the beauty of faith, is that it is actually a word that describes a connection to something that's greater than we can know. But you have to get to the point where your ego realizes it's really not nearly as smart as it thinks it is, because that's a death trap. If you don't get to that point, you can be the smartest dumb guy in town. And some guy who has deep connection to faith can solve lots of challenges that your ego can't deal with. So I think it's fun to have that connection to the mystery and the magic behind it all,
Well, I think it's even more than that, in the sense of what you're actually broadcasting out to people is salvation, because people are stuck in a material world.
Totally.
They're in an Ahrimanic deception. Steiner stuff as good as anybody.
Yeah.
They're caught up in materialist explanations for everything. And so they're out of magic. And you don't live in that world. I don't live in that world, but everybody else really, to some level, is living in that world. And so there's an inner joy that comes from being connected to source, being connected to your intuition, your instincts, being connected with faith.
Yeah.
And it can't be taken away from you. It doesn't matter what happens. And I think what we are trying to do is bring people into that place.
Yeah.
And so they're ignited from within. I know that's a real big part of your work, and it's an important message for people out there, because it saves you from despair. It saves you from yearning for impossible materialistic ideals, and gets you back into the magic and mystery of living, and in the magic and mystery of the moment.
Hi, everybody. In this wild and very fun podcast, David Wolfe and I, two guys that are highly committed to organic food and organic farming, really engage some deep topics. If you don't have a solid health foundation and a nutritious, clean diet, then deep thinking is unlikely to happen, even when you most need it. When it comes to finding high-quality organic nutrition that's easy to prepare, tastes great, and has high-quality fat sources such as organic coconut, you just can't beat Organifi's product line. My family, myself, and many of my clients and athletes that I coached use them daily, and I know you and your children will benefit from them too. Go to Organifi.com, that's Organifi.com, and check out their amazing product line. To get your awesome 20% Living 4D with Paul Chek discount at checkout, use the code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20. And to get to know Drew Canole, the founder of Organifi, listen to my Living 4D podcast number 64, Drew Canole, UBU. I think when you get to know the guy, you'll have a clear sense that a man with these kind of values only produces great stuff. And that's why I'm sharing it with you. Lots of love. Yeah, you and Shervine both love the Ahrimanic expression of things, but most people listening won't have a clue what that means. So why don't you give an explanation of what you mean by the Ahrimanic deception? Yeah.
So in Steiner's cosmology, there's two forces of evil, both being parasitic to the creative force, which is God, Jesus, consciousness, the Christ consciousness, whatever it is.
The good,
whatever.
The light.
The light is a good one. And so these are forces that are parasitic in nature, and they need to be there because they're part of the recycling mechanism that gives some opposition.
Well, they also create freedom. If there was nothing but the light, you'd be blind. And if there was nothing but the dark, there'd be no consciousness. Those forces work together, but you're saying there's two forces.
There's two forces. And so this is, if I think you probably would agree that we could say Steiner's like a reincarnated Aristotle in the sense that he's bringing back the golden mean in a certain way.
Yeah.
And let's just imagine the golden mean, the bell curve. In the middle, let's say it's the light, the source energy. On one side is the escapism, the false light. Giving our power away, giving our responsibility away. That's the one side, and that's one danger, and that's one pitfall. And the other side is the Ahrimanic side, which is the materialism. Everything has a materialistic cause. Your illness, it's just a pill for every ill. It's a cut, burn, poison therapy. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a materialistic solution to your unhappiness. That's the Ahrimanic deception. And so we reach deeper when we get into the light towards what's going on emotionally, what's going on mentally, what's happening spiritually. If somebody's cut off spiritually, they're usually in an Ahrimanic deception in the sense that they might be atheistic because they don't believe in a power greater than human consciousness.
Yeah, it's interesting. The reality of it is, though, when you go into matter, there's nothing there but emptiness and the quantum vacuum. So really, I had a podcast with Aubrey Marcus, and his only question was, what is the devil and what is evil, right? And one of the key points that I made, because he had a shamanic experience where he came into contact with a lot of evil forces, and it kind of tripped him out. And I said to him, no mind, no evil. But to have consciousness, you have to have a mind. And to have consciousness, you have to have polarity, because you can't have consciousness. I'd like Edward Edinger's definition of consciousness. There's many I could cite, but Edinger, who's a famous Jungian analyst, who wrote a great book called The Anatomy of the Psyche. It's right here somewhere. Phenomenal book. But he defines consciousness as a psychic substance produced not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites. So, even though people get, wound up about the devil and about Ahriman and the various elements, they're in all the religions. Every religion has these forces, Brahma, Shiva, Krishna, they're there. Every single religion has it. But the reality of it is, it's all God. And people forget that. And I think that's really important. The evil really, in my opinion, since we're talking about Ahrimanic forces, evil is really very similar to the force of yin in that it brings things into a center. So someone who's evil wants everything for themselves.
Right.
So the evil emperor,
they're centralized.
He wants to centralize everything to himself.
Good point.
And so what he's doing is he's accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. That's exactly what yin does. Yin, by definition, is that which multiplies power. Yang, by definition, divides power. So the sun shoots its light in every direction. It divides its power that's catabolic, that's light, that's yang. The problem is that at the level of the psyche, when people get too connected to evil or power mongering or controlling or everything we associate with evil, they actually create the illusion of self-dependence. But what you see is dictatorships and, kind of fascism,
Tyranny.
And so what happens is that brings that person further and further away from the connection. And then, as Jesus says in the Bible, a rich man can no sooner get to heaven than a camel can get through the eye of the needle. So you end up with mountains and mountains of matter, but no connection to source. And now you're afraid to die. And the Egyptians were embalming, and people are trying to go get plastic surgery and live forever. And this is all just, afraid of death.
Right. Good point.
Which is really just not understanding that the two polarities are necessary, or the show, in Hindu terminology, Maya or Layla, the dance, can't go on. So I think for a lot of people is that if they recognize that these forces are actually an inherent part of life and that we can all use them, just like, like Alan Watts says, he says, if you look at a beautiful rug, what you don't see is the backside of the rug. You walk on the beautiful side, but when you flip it over, you see all the shortcuts the weavers took to make it look beautiful, but it's ugly back there. And the point I'm making is the ugly side is necessary so the beautiful side can be seen and appreciated, because if we didn't know what we didn't want, how would we know what we do want?
That's right. Okay, so I want to get into that. See, that I eventually, in that philosophy of for example, the rational defines the irrational. The logical defines the illogical.
Yes.
Without one, you can't have the other.
Subjective, objective.
Right. And so we live in between them. We live in between them. And that's a very interesting discovery that, okay, we live in a material world. Well, really? It looks like a lot of empty space. And eventually you realize, nope, as soon as you start going down that route, you go, it's not there. And you start coming back towards this other route and you go, well, there is something there. This table is here. It's somewhere in between. Everything's somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And so in the research of like investigating these books and trying to figure out like where are we in the cycle of things, the expansion and contraction of things, it feels like we're on a surge of expansion from what had been a deep contraction. And that contraction might be called the Kali Yuga.
It could, or you could go further and say that the Big Bang, which I believe is just one of an infinite series of Big Bangs,
Expansion, contraction.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Forever.
The nature of the two forces that create the entire universe or existence itself. So those are necessary forces, but you go back to that, and that's the beginning of an expansive cycle. And so all those cycles are really expressions of the one cycle. But what was triggered in my mind listening to you there is that something Einstein said. Einstein said the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. And he was speaking of quantum particles and subatomic particles. But you have to say, well, what's the field?
Yeah.
Well, you can't identify it as this or that. Well, the field is God. The field is that which can't be named, but is obviously there because matter is not self-organizing. This is why the whole idea of consciousness coming from brains is not a very deep thinking idea. And Amit Goswami himself said, well, you have to ask yourself what created brains. And life was here long before brains emerged. Brains didn't even emerge until jellyfish. They were the first creatures with something along the lines of a nervous system or a brain, but life was here for billions of years before that. But the point that I'm driving at is those two forces are the act of the dance in the field itself. And the field, you could say, is that which is neither the vacuum or the plenum, or in Taoism would be Wu Qi. Tai Chi means life, the marriage of yin and yang, and the creativity that emerges from it, or the necessary requisites of being, behind which is non-being, that which can't be known. And a simple way that I define that to my students is everything we know of in the created universe is some form of vibration or combinations of vibration. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think vibration, but also some level of material substance.
Well, something has to vibrate.
So it's some kind of it's both.
Yeah.
And maybe other things that we don't have names for yet,
Sure.
like a field, right?
Yes.
Because we have vibration, we have field, we have some kind of, there's a substance there, I think.
That gets back to the ether argument.
Right.
That's the foundation of that which vibrates. It's, in alchemy, it's called the prima materia, the original matter, or, in current, if you study the electric universe, then they would call it plasma. But the point that I'm driving at is if you just draw a sine wave, right? So here's the flat line. There's a sine wave. If somebody's alive and you look at their electrocardiogram, you're getting positive and negative polarities. When they die, they flatline. So the field, I propose, and God and consciousness with a capital C is the point at which you're not positive or negative. So therefore, everything is emergent from that which can't be measured because there's nothing to measure there. So I keep telling people all this search for consciousness is looking at it in the wrong way. They're looking at what we're conscious of, but consciousness is the source from which it's all emerging, and you can't measure it because A, it's moving at the speed of now. It's moving at the speed of the absolute. Itzhak Bentov showed if you take a sine wave and make it go faster and faster and faster, you reach the point where it's everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, and now it's got absolute presence, absolute awareness, absolute being, absolute everything. And that's typical descriptions of God. Omnipresent, omniscient. Omni means all. So in other words, consciousness is the backdrop or the field or even behind the field, but is expressing itself in that which moves through the basic element of frequency, and everything is frequency, from food to stones to the whole universe.
So it's like the creation is a stereoscopic form of creation experiencing itself from all the different viewpoints at various states of expansion, contraction.
Totally.
Right? That's kind of how I look at it.
Yes.
It's basically like you and I. We're different viewpoints of the overall situation. So we're all part of the field.
Yeah.
And so it's like God experiencing our viewpoints.
Well, God is us. But you see, one way I describe this is, God's often described as an ocean, right? Even Rumi describes God as an ocean. Rumi says, you are not a drop of the ocean. You are the ocean in a drop. But the point is the ocean is a common word used amongst mystics to describe God because it's really a word that describes the container, like a fish in the ocean. So if we imagine that whatever space is, it's the ocean and space just goes forever. So if you think of it this way, so you and I right now are sitting in the ocean and so is everything. And we're submerged in it, right? Because there's no end to it. So if you have an ocean that's conscious, it's the base of consciousness, and it's sensitive to all that moves because it emerges from the still point, then whatever is in the ocean is in consciousness, and so the different ideas manifest in the potential, or what Itzhak Bentov would call the implicate order, the seed potential. Like you
into the explicate order.
It expresses itself as explicate, but you as a seed guy would know you can cut an acorn open, and no matter how high-powered the microscope is, you'll never see an oak tree in there. But the idea is implicated.
Right.
So as the oak tree takes form, it's got the consciousness of oak treeness, or the tree archetype. But the point that I'm making is if you are soaked in consciousness, but you have a unique construct, a unique body, a unique nervous system, a unique way of relating, perceiving, sensing, or processing information, because another definition of consciousness is the total information carrying capacity of a system, be it a biological system, a computer system, whatever. You could just say the total information carrying capacity. So the total information carrying capacity of a single-celled organism is only so much, but a human body has 100 trillion of them. So you're going to have 100 trillion times metaphorically that capacity. But the point I'm really driving at is if you take a human being like you and a human being like me with different racial, ethnic, historical, genetic, historical backgrounds, we're both in consciousness looking at each other, having the perception of a unique experience, but not realizing it's only because we're expressions of the same ocean of consciousness that we can actually see diversity within the unity that's represented by the ocean. So if it wasn't for the diversity of races, of colors, of religions, of plants, trees, species, planets, stars, galaxies, then God could never know what God is. So essentially, as Lao Tzu says in the Tao Te Ching, speaking of the Tao, all things have their back to the mother, which means there's nothing to look at behind God. So the only way God can know God is to look in. And ultimately, what do we have to do to grow spiritually? Look in.
That was something I wanted to talk to you about is the trend towards people going back to looking within for the answer instead of without.
Yeah.
Right. So this idea, this is also an harmonic concept, is that it's going to be somewhere outside of me. It's a without. It's over there. I don't have it inside. But this trend now that we see, people are starting to go, wait, it's inside.
Yeah.
There's more and more fingers going inside, look inside.
Yeah.
So let's get into the nature of that.
Well,
the implicit, right? What's implicit within.
Well, one of the interesting things from science is that we have something like 3 billion brain cells in the average brain. Each one can have 10 to 30,000 synaptic connections. When they do the math on that, there's more neural connections in a human brain than there are stars in the known universe. So what am I saying? And mystics have said this for a long time. Steiner said this. Most of them do. What I'm saying is that there is an actual copy of the entire universe inside of us. So, to get to the sun from here is a long plane ride. It's even a long rocket ride. It's 8 minutes moving at the speed of light. But to get to the sun inside of you is as quick as your consciousness can focus on the sun. And if you look at it materially, it gets to be quite interesting too, because they've looked at this scientifically for a long time. So when they look at the elements that make the Earth up,
Okay. Periodic table of the elements.
Yes.
We can get into that because I've come across very interesting research on that and done some myself, and I find it to be an interesting subject to converse about.
Well, I'll just share my view on it since we're going down that road, because I'm trying to point out something physically that points us back to the inside of ourselves. But what I'm pointing to is that they say, okay, we have these elements on the Earth. Where did they come from? Well, they had to come from stars. So they go to the sun and they look at light frequencies and use, I forgot, what is it, stereoscopic analysis, which is looking at the frequencies of light and the elements that are in the planets
that correlate
or stars.
To those.
They will produce certain frequencies of light. So they know what's in stars by looking at the frequencies of light coming out of it. So what they do is they go say, okay, what's in our sun? Well, there's a lot of things that are on Earth that aren't in our sun. For example, maybe from asteroids and everything. But the point I'm getting at is they say, okay, well, where did the elements in the sun come from? Well, based on current science, when a star like that explodes, it becomes a black hole and sucks everything in from millions of miles around, and that's other stars. So what the conclusion is that everything that we're made of came from everywhere in the universe. So what your brain is made of is subatomic particles and atoms that are once in the sun, but were once potentially in every other star that ever existed out there. And research shows that when you drink water, you're drinking water that has atoms of Jesus's and Buddha's bodies and dinosaurs and everything else in it. When you breathe air, you're breathing in Muhammad and Krishna. So the ego creates this illusion of the out there. But the truth of the matter is that the in here and the out there actually have no dividing line. There's no door. It's kind of like the space in a house. You walk into the space in a house and you say it's nice in here. But the space in the house is really no different than the space outside the door, except for the illusion of the door. So we create this partition and we call it ourself, but not realizing that that is really a very powerful illusion and a necessary illusion, because without the illusion of self, there would be no way for you and I to exchange love and relationship, Because if you and I didn't know the difference between each other, then there would be no subject-object relationship. So how could you become the object of my love or my devotion? How could you say, I love you? Or how would you know you're being loved? Without which God itself couldn't know love. So the funny thing, too, is all this ego bashing and get rid of the ego and all that stuff. I say, yeah, heal the ego. But don't forget, it's the one thing you got that allows you to love. And so the point that I'm making is it doesn't matter whether you go. If you go at it from consciousness, you end up everywhere. If you go at it from matter, you end up everywhere. If you track it back to the sun, you just have to say, well, where'd that come from? And that goes on forever. So really, when one of the questions I was recently asked in an interview by some young guys who have a big following on YouTube, and because there's a lot of young people that are really kind of having a hard time these days. They're suffering from a lot of existential angst. And one of the questions that the interview asked me very seriously, and I've had many people ask me this, how do you love yourself? I said, well, first of all, realize it took the whole fucking universe to create you. You think you came from your mommy and daddy and you stop it there. And if your life's been shitty, then you don't realize the shitty life is really just a reminder to say, use the power of conscience within you to create something beautiful and share it with the world. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to share Symbiotica's coated silver, which is an excellent product. I'm sure you've heard of colloidal silver before, which is an ancient technology for killing immune pathogens and protecting yourself naturally. I brought Shervin in to share the advances in the technologies he's made, because this is one of the most important products you can have in your arsenal right now with the coronavirus scare and all the other issues of public health we're facing. So, Shervin, what's unique about your coated silver product?
Well, we're in crazy times right now.
Yes.
We're dealing with viruses, pathogens, all forms of disease breaking down the body, and we're resisting the antibiotics. And we now know that antibiotics destroy friendly flora.
Yes.
We do not want to disturb that super balance of our microbiome. That's what I like to call it, because that's the brain, heart, mind connection. It all starts from the gut.
Yes.
Coated silver was invented and perfected at Clarkson University by a PhD chemist with decades of experience in nanotechnology. So we have multiple studies and government studies that back the safety of this up and its efficacy as a real health tonic product.
Yes.
And so, as you know, silver does not fight friendly flora. Friendly flora breathe oxygen. Silver antagonizes and drowns out, basically suffocates anything that's nitrogen breathing, which is the dirty pathogens, which are things that don't belong there. So this silver product can be used in any way. You can take it orally, you can nebulize it, put it in a diffuser, you can make topical sprays, you can put it in a neti pot. It's 20,000 parts per million. Most things at the store are 5 to 20 parts per million. This is 20,000 parts per million, and it's bounded to a polysaccharide. So it is almost like a food. So it gets in your body, does what it needs to do, and gets out.
Awesome.
This is critical.
Well, to get your 15% discount, go to cymbiotika.com. That's symbiotica.com. And on checkout, use your code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K 15 for your 15% discount. And while you're there, make sure you check out all the rest of Symbiotica's absolutely amazing products. I've tried them all. I use them as needed, and they're all excellent. I can't wait to hear your feedback on this amazing product. If it's shitty, just like you, you say you like to plant trees and feed people well and things like that. I like to do the same thing. Why? Because I know how shitty it can get when you don't have the knowledge to do that, and when you don't have the knowledge to take care of yourself, when you don't know that there's other approaches than the standard medical approaches, when you think all there is to eat is cornflakes, or whatever the fuck,
So there a couple things come up, and I want to get into these with you. One is what you're trending towards is the increase in awareness puts you more into the reality of what is.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an awareness increase, right?
Yeah.
That kind of precedes everything.
Awareness is the prerequisite for consciousness.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's get into this awareness. Let's put it, this is going to be a good one. We've got a guy jumps out of a 10-story building, dies. Mm-hmm. We got a guy goes out of a 10-story building, lives, but is seriously hurt. We got a guy goes out to 10 stories of a building, is unhurt. There's always an X factor that's built into our reality for some reason. I saw one yesterday. I was up flipping through my phone, and some dude came across a lane, knocked a guy off his motorcycle. The guy went across the freeway with a truck coming straight at him, missed the guy's head by inches. He was coming at him probably at 50 miles per hour, and this guy's going against him, so you can imagine what the impact would have been. And the guy just missed it and just was back up and was fine. And so this X factor that's built into all of reality, the bizarre, the unusual, the hyper synchronistic, that's what I want to get into with you.
All right.
Yes. This is, to me, like when I was very young, I think it was probably Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Penny loves that movie. I've watched it too.
And the books, Douglas Adams' books, if you recall.
I'm not familiar.
They're worth reading. I think he ended up with 5 or 6 of them. It comes in a compendium about that thick. And it's really fun. So one day when I turned 42, because that was the answer to the universe, I was like, let me read all of them. So I just went back and I reread all of them. I'd only read the first one when I was a kid. But there's this idea of randomness in there. And there's an idea of the X factor that's in there. I think it was in the movie, it was the improbability drive, something like that, if you recall. And let me tell you my thoughts on it. Or actually, before I do that, I want to get your thoughts on it, just unsullied.
Well, I don't, I'll tell you what the X factor is for me. Whether or not it's marching in the direction that you're marching in, I'll let you decide. But I meditated for years to ask Great Spirit or God to show me, A, what love is and how God creates something from nothing. And repeatedly I was given an answer, but it took me a lot of meditation to really get to it. And so I came up with a formula for consciousness, and it's this: S, Om, X. Now, when you look at that, doesn't it look just like the word sex?
It does.
Okay. S equals 0, the unconditional of love, which only has 2 qualities. It's empty of itself, but full of itself. And those two are constantly becoming each other at the speed of now. That's the source of spirit. No thing becoming something, which always becomes no thing, right? So there's an infinite exchange of energy at the speed of now. And that energy is the basis of Om, which is the primordial symbol that means the sound of God singing itself into existence. The X factor is, what am I going to do with it? Right? So when you look at a mathematical equation, if there's an X, you have to fill in the blank.
Right. It's a variable.
So it's a variable. So the reality of it is people say, do we have free will? I say, well, only if you choose to. If you want to be. But the point I'm making is the X factor is choice. It is choice. And interesting, I don't know if you're familiar with Arthur M. Young, the guy that invented the Bell helicopter.
I'm familiar with the Bell helicopter.
Yeah, well, Arthur M. Young was a genius, and he devoted his life and his money to the study of consciousness, and he's written some very good books like The Reflexive Universe, and he identified an entire structure to how consciousness grows and evolves. But what Arthur M. Young says is that when we make a choice, it produces light, and that light is an expression of consciousness, and whatever we become conscious
I'm going to grab a pen here.
Yeah, go for it.
I've got some ideas. This is going to light up some good stuff here.
What we become conscious of, the entire universe becomes conscious of, because we forget that we can't be separate from the entire universe. And if you look at Fred Hoyle, if you look at Amit Goswami, the self-aware universe, Irvin Laszlo, all the great scientists are saying every experience that we're having is in a constant feedback loop with the entire universe. And if you go to my formula where the line is the S factor, because the positive and the negative are moving at the speed of now, which is immeasurable. But within that is Om, which is expressing itself eternally, which basically gives us the basic building blocks to use consciousness to, so we say, allocate that energy and information into the creation of whatever we want. And that's the X factor.
I like it.
To the motorcycle. Well, let's just say there's 3 guys. let's call them a copy of each other. Each one of them a different disposition, a different belief, a different mindset, just to say, okay, there's three identical twins. One doesn't believe in God. One was raised a Christian and thinks it's sinning for touching his genitals and doesn't feel it deserves to live. And the other one thinks life is a complete fucking mystery and it's just a goddamn exciting experience. So when you look at the fact that research shows that the ego is only about 5% of our total consciousness, the rest of it's unconscious and superconscious, then you could say, well, each of them is actually creating their own reality. One, at the unconscious level, believes maybe he's a sinner and should die. The other one has a different belief which produces his outcome, maybe a bad injury, and the other one gets up and walks away and says, thank God, which is what he says every day, after every gift, after every meal, and trusts that there's a mystery beyond himself and stays open to it. So each of them is actually using the X factor to produce something deeper than their conscious mind even realizes, which is why Arnold Paton says in his Universal Principles, if you don't like what's happening in your life, look carefully at what you're choosing unconsciously. So I think the X factor is choice, but I think God's little trick is it doesn't matter whether you're conscious or unconscious of the choice. The only way you can learn is by paying attention to what you're creating and its impact on other people. It's either adding beauty and harmony to the world, or it isn't.
So this is bringing up.
Now, I don't know if I was going down the road you wanted with the X factor.
I want to get into the X factor. We'll come at it at a different way. But what I want to get into is this idea of the different choices, the different people in this particular scenario with their different karmas.
Yeah.
Right. So then let's get into reincarnation.
Sure.
Okay. So in this cosmology that we're talking about, and somebody, let's say they're a Christian, they're super intense fundamentalist in their Christianity, they believe everyone's a sinner, whatever their story is, in that case, when they pass out of this world, their soul goes where?
Their soul goes to their mind. Whatever you believe is your reality, because beyond mind, there is no thing. Beyond mind, you're behind Om. Om is mind. That is mind. Within God, spirit is pure mind. In other words, spirit is all potential. You could call it the implicate if you wanted to look at it that way. But whatever you believe and conceive is your reality.
Is
right?
where you go when you die.
I'll give you a perfect example of this. Have you ever done a firewalk?
Yes.
A real one?
Yep.
Okay, well, Tony, I used to be Tony Robbins' therapist, and him and I had a friendship for many years. While I was working with him, I've lost contact with him. I'd still call him my friend. We just haven't talked. But Tony and I are only 2 weeks apart in age, and he used to invite me to pretty much all of his seminars if I wanted to come, because he just loved to hear my feedback. But when I went to the firewalk, and he took us through a process of how to hypnotize ourselves, and the mantra that he gave us was cool moss. If you look at the fire, and instead of letting yourself get afraid and believing it's fire, you see it as and believe it as cool moss, like the bottom of a forest floor, and you believe that so fully that you can walk across the fire, your body doesn't know the difference, and the fire doesn't burn you. And these fires took hours to get ready. He had a thermometer in there, pulled it out so everyone could see it. There's like 2,500 people there. And it was 2,600 degrees. And I'm a metal worker. That freaking fire was fucking hot. Okay, so I'm standing there. I'm like, okay, if he can fucking, because me and Tony are like the same age. I'm like, if Tony can fucking do this, I can do it. God damn it. I'm not gonna let Tony fucking pull one over on me. And sure enough, and I've been to work camps with yogis and studied. My mother's a yogi. And so I knew these things are possible. It's just exciting for me to see, can I do it? So I went into the process, cool moss, visualized it as cool moss, walked across, didn't feel a thing. But around me were people that got scared right in the middle of it, and I could smell their flesh burning, man. There was people in the ambulance. I saw people whose whole bottoms of their feet were just bubbling blisters. What's the difference? Your mind. Okay, well, the same fire of transformation, or if you want to call it physical termination, we could just call it death. And whatever you have in your mind, if you believe God's going to burn you in hell, I'm a shaman. I can tell you there's a lot of people stuck in what's called the middle realm out there. They haven't moved on to what you might call the heaven realm or the higher realms, and they're not here on the earth realm because they're afraid that God's going to burn them in hell, so they fear the light. So they move away from the light. Look at thousands and thousands of NDEs. The most common thing people say is the light appeared to me, and the light was all love, and I moved into the light. Okay? Well, if you believe that light is evil, which a lot the Abrahamic religions will program you to believe that if you're not some perfect thing, which every one of them believes is different, then you're going to go burn in hell. So the soul can get trapped in the intermediate realm, but what's it trapped by? Its own mind.
Right. Got it.
Its own mind.
Yes.
Because beyond mind, there is no thing that can be recognized, known, or even spoken. You know, like Lao Tzu says, there's two Tao's, the Tao that can be spoken, mind, creativity, and everything that you call matter is in the embodiment of ideas in the mind of God, and the Tao that can't be spoken. So that's my response to your...
So on the flip side, then coming back and reincarnating back onto the prime material plane,
Yes.
then you're working on your karma. So there's a chance for movement.
Yeah.
So in the spirit
Growth.
world, there's no chance for growth. And on this earth, maybe there's chances for growth. That's a Steiner concept right there.
Yeah, if you study theosophy, you're familiar with theosophy?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you study theosophy, the analogy they give, there's a great book that goes into this called Space, Time, and Self by... I can't remember the author.
One of the theosophists, like Besant or
Yeah, no, it's
Ledbetter
not
or
Besant, but
Blavatsky or
it's
Krishnamurti.
one of the kind of pioneers of theosophy. It's a beautiful book. In fact, if Penny can hear me, she can find the book because I think we have some copies in our office. Norman Pearson, Space, Time, and Self by Norman Pearson.
Okay.
And it was written a long time ago, but it's very beautiful. He shows the picture. He shows a picture of a wagon wheel. And he says that the axle of the wagon wheel is the unmoved mover or the soul, and that the personality or the conscious awareness of self, he puts a dot on the wheel. Then horizontally through the axle, he draws a line. Above the horizon of the line through the axle is life.
You mean through the wheel? So the wheel's half sticking up here, for example, if this is the horizon.
Yeah, and you know how the wheel would be on the ground, but if there's the axle,
there's the horizon
he takes
there.
the line through the center of the axle.
Yep.
Okay? So then he says, here's a dot. That's birth. And as the wheel rolls, midpoint would be midlife, and the point at which that dot rolls to the horizon, which goes below the axle, would be death. So what he says is that in the afterlife, it's equivalent to what he calls simulator training. You can look at what you've done. You can look at the relationships you've had. You can watch what people are doing in this plane of life like we watch a movie. But you can't grow spiritually until you're in life, just like no pilot can be approved as a pilot from a simulator.
Right. You actually have to do it.
You have to have a plane full of people and be in a real life circumstance to get, and no soldier can become a soldier shooting on a video game, right? Nobody can get good at boxing on a boxing game. It's not until the heavy bag starts hitting back that you find out if you're a boxer. So in Norman Pearson's description, the afterlife is where we go into review and we can meet teachers and guides that can help us choose the path that we'll take to grow ourselves. But when we are reborn, we go out of simulator training and preparation into the action field of life itself.
Can you be reborn in other worlds?
You can be potentially reborn anywhere, depending on what level of conscious awareness you're at, what your desires are, because ultimately it's all mind. I mean, a good example of that is your dreams. There's really no difference between the afterlife and dreaming, in my opinion.
Well, the Greeks called it the little death. They called sleep. Then they had the same, it was like this related gods.
Yeah.
I got that from Greek mythology, that they were like, there was a very strong correlation that only later I found that Steiner had that same correlation, that when you're in the astral realm, dreaming, it's very similar to death.
Yes, I think so too. Hi, everyone. You know, I spent a year researching all sorts of certified organic CBD oil and hemp oil products, trying to find one good enough to use regularly and to help me heal the neck pain I have from a stunt lifting accident many years ago, and to help me recover from training. Though I tested about a dozen different companies' products, none of them impressed me enough to want to share them with you. Then, my buddy Kyle Kingsbury turned me on to his favorite company, One Farm, and my family and I gave their products a try. I've been using their water-soluble USDA-certified organic hemp extract for a month now and found it to be incredibly pure. I can feel the energetic effects of it immediately when I put it in my mouth, and it has been one of the best sources of pain relief and recovery aid I've found yet. They make their water-soluble hemp extracts in a variety of concentrations, offer them in edible forms, and have many other great products that you'll love as well. As a sponsor of Living 4D with Paul Chek, One Farm generously offers all of you a 15% discount on any purchase by going to https://onefarm.com/check. No discount code is needed. Just follow the link. You'll know you're there because you'll see pictures of me and some of my podcasts featured there, and your 15% coupon code will be automatically added to your order. Have a look at their wide range of excellent CBD oils, beauty products, edibles, and more. As always, One Farm and I would love to hear any feedback you and your pets have and would like to share. And you can trust me, I wouldn't be sharing this stuff with you if I wasn't really convinced that this was the very best product I can get out there. And I did test a lot of them, so enjoy. And I've had some, well, I've nearly died many times. I mean, I've had bad motorcycle racing accidents. One time I was racing motorcycles, and me and a buddy were racing out in some logging roads, and he was ahead of me, and it was in the summer, and there's just so much dust I couldn't see anything. And they had piled a pile of logs. I don't know if you've been around a logging community, but they pile logs on the side of the road to get ready to be loaded onto the trucks to be taken away.
Yeah, of course.
But I could not see, and it was a narrow, single-lane logging road, and he swerved around the logs, and we were going full speed. I mean, I'm going flat out, and I didn't see the pile of logs, and I hit it head on, and I flew off my motorcycle over, skidded along these logs. One of the branches went right through my abdominal wall, and it gave me a concussion so bad that I was completely unconscious for over 2 days. And so I had a death experience there, and I've had several of them with plant medicines where I've entered into the absolute and didn't even know if I was alive or dead.
Ooh, that's a subject we need to get into, because that's, to me, when we get into this X factor conversation, is the existence of plant medicines and animal medicines like toad medicine in this reality, which I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Where I'm coming from on those things, by the way, is I've been out there with the toads. I lived with the toads for years out in the Arizona desert. And I've also grown all of the plants, because I listened to Terrence McKenna, and he's like,
I love Terrence McKenna.
Grow the plants, right? Yeah, and grow the plants and figure it out. But the plants are your gurus. And I thought, that sounds great. I love plants. I'm going to grow these things. So I've been at that for 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's been, like, recently, I got to tell you this story. We drank ayahuasca on Christmas Eve. And I'm not the person who serves up ayahuasca, but everyone in the family was like, we want, come on, this is the night.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, Christmas Eve, that makes sense. So it's our home brew that we made from the stuff we grew ourselves. We had a shaman come out for 8 days, do the whole Shipibo prayers and everything on the whole thing. And I've had this batch in my closet for a while. So I took one of those bottles out and I was like, okay, we're going to drink this. So we drink the brew. It's about 4 hours into the experience. I grabbed the guys and I'm like, let's go outside on the, cause it's got guys and gals. And I was like, the guys, let's go outside, smoke some tobacco and really take this in. And it was a windstorm outside, hurricane level, tornado level, full on, like intense
journey.
I mean, it was just, have you ever been in a tornado?
I haven't been in a tornado. I've been in extremely rough seas, though. I used to work on fishing boats. I've been in seas big enough that the swells were like 40 to 45 feet. And when our boat was at the bottom, which was a 42-foot fishing boat, all I could see was a wall of water on either side. And I felt like we were going to be swallowed by the ocean. And it definitely get your adrenaline fucking going. I mean, I've been out in the seas in, 90-mile-an-hour winds with huge swells.
Oh my God.
On a small boat.
Wow.
And wondering if I was going to live.
Yep.
So I've been in weather big enough to blow full-size Douglas fir trees right over.
That's full on.
Yeah, it's intense, man. Yeah.
So it was one of those kind of nights.
Yeah.
And about an hour, we're sitting outside. Those guys were really deep into it. And I was, I'm trying to monitor the whole situation because I'm running this whole thing. So I've got to like kind of keep an eye on everybody. Big, some kind of sound. I couldn't recognize the sound happens. I thought it was in the front yard, but I was like, geez, I hope that wasn't on our land. Well, it was on our land. Up at the top of the hill, the tree with the ayahuasca on it, which by the way is a Christmas berry tree on Christmas Eve, was ripped out of the ground with the ayahuasca, and the whole thing went flying down the hill. Wow! And now the ayahuasca is in another place. Yeah. On that night. Yeah. And that ayahuasca had been there for 12 years. Yeah. So that kind of X factor, like what the heck is ayahuasca doing in our reality? What is San Pedro cactus, Wachuma doing on a reality? How about the peyote cactus? What about tobacco, cannabis? What are these things doing on a reality? And it seems to me that they're teachers of some sort, like masters that reincarnated as a plant.
Well, they certainly could be, but they're also bridges. They're dimensional bridges.
Interesting. Okay, keep going. I like this.
The thing too, I've done over 400 medicine ceremonies, and so I have a lot of experience, and I've had, many powerful experiences. And I've also gone to complete unknowing and not even knowing I was alive on Tai Chi as well. I mean, I've had experiences of complete awareness on Tai Chi. I remember one time and I'm only saying this so people don't think, these guys are just drug heads. I've been doing Tai Chi consistently almost every day for 18 or 19 years now. And I was trained by Master Fong Ho, who's in the ancient lineage of real masters, and he is a real master. But I went out one afternoon. It was probably about 4:30, and the sun was probably, in the afternoon position, maybe 30 degrees above the ocean horizon. And I started doing Tai Chi. And the next thing you know, I have this shocking experience of like, where am I? What happened? It was almost like I'd gone through a time warp. And I had no sense of being alive or being dead or being Paul, or, I've had many union experiences or samadhis where I became one with the universe through meditation and through plant medicines. But all of a sudden, it's pitch black outside. And I've been out there for like an hour and a half or more, and I had no sense of awareness of time, space, movement, nothing. I went into this complete sort of bliss of what is sometimes called in Zen Buddhism prajna, or pure awareness. And it was so profound. I mean, I remember just sitting out there baffled, like what just happened and how did it happen? And it was different than a samadhi where you become one with the universe, because when you become one with the universe in a samadhi, there's at some point in the experience, there's an, oh my God, I am the stars, I am the moon, I am everything. And there's the conscious awareness of the I-ness of you acknowledging that it is now fused with everything. So there's that duality there. So you can have the I am experience. This was deeper than that.
This is like Toad. Like there is no I.
There's no I. There is no
There's
thou.
no Paul. There's nothing left.
There's nothing even to say.
Yeah.
But somehow you're there, and somehow you're having an experience, but language does not, there's no container in language for it.
Yeah.
And it was trippy. I mean, as a guy who studied this stuff deeply for most of his life, I could not find words to describe an experience like that.
Were you still doing Tai Chi when
Yes.
you were on the ground? So
I was moving the whole time, doing Tai Chi, but didn't even know it. It was as though I was in a completely different reality of existence while my body was down there doing Tai Chi in my garden with the coyotes walking around me and the rabbits and the squirrels all doing their thing.
Trippy.
Oh, it was deep as hell, man.
And it just out of nowhere, that just happened.
I went out of nowhere, 15 years of preparation.
Yeah.
But the point is a sort of unexpected, not like you get ready for a medicine journey and you got to get your mind right, the environment right, do your prayers, have your intention, or you get your ass handed to you. But it was just after work, my normal routine, and what was normally about a 30-minute Tai Chi session turned into something 3 times that long. And normally when the sun goes down, I go get in the sauna and meditate, right? So sometimes I'll sit with the sun and do Egyptian sun gazing, but typically I go jump in the sauna, and I finish my evening ceremony by doing the Tai Chi, then the meditation. Well, I blew right past that. The girls were like, "Where have you been?" I'm like, honestly, I don't know. I fucking don't know.
That's epic. It reminds me of, people think like, oh, you're going to do this drug like Toad and you're going to get there. I've done Toad for 20 years. You don't always get there. You rarely get there, actually, all the way there.
Toad is actually...
it's not a guarantee.
No,
that's another thing, too.
Yeah, Toad's... If somebody really wants to have the complete union experience, I can tell you a lot more powerful than Toad is a high-quality synthetic DMT. I don't like using synthetics, but when I did a year of training with a doctor who basically was my mentor, he had a lot of different medicines I used, different LSDs, mescaline. I did a year we did about 40 ceremonies together.
Jeez, so like almost every week.
Almost every week, yeah. And I needed it too. I was at the point in my life where I just needed to get out of the fucking box.
When does someone need it?
You need it when your reality gets flat enough that you
lose the magic.
For me, what happened was the pressure of running the institute, and just the financial pressure and the constant jet travel. I lived on airplanes for almost 25 years, going conference hall to conference hall.
We so share that.
Yeah,
that.
I got so uprooted and lost my connection to the earth, and I got to the point where I felt like I'd bled my heart and soul out to help the world, but I wasn't getting nourished in return anymore. And part of it was my own story, my savior story, and maybe some martyr in there, and also just me feeling so sorry for people and realizing that a lot of people just don't get good information, and they don't have the knowledge that I have, and they weren't raised on a farm. There's just so much they don't know, and seeing how many people are sick. So there was an inner story, right? And I was living the story out. But the story depleted me so bad that even with my Tai Chi, I felt like I was at a tipping point where if I went any further, I was going to get sick, and I was going to be bad marketing for my own philosophy. So I said to Penny, I've got to stop traveling, because if I go any further, I'm actually going to be going against my own teachings, and I'd rather die than do that.
Wow.
So it was a huge stress, because there was a direct correlation between how many presentations I give and the total,
and your income.
And the income, right?
Yeah.
And our overhead was big. And so I just said, look, if we have to shut the business down or sell it or whatever we got to do, I can't go against my own philosophy, or I'm going to ruin it. I'm going to ruin everything I worked for. So I reached a midlife crisis point where I had given everything I had lived my philosophy, but I had also reached the point where if I did not
stop,
and it just so happened that out of the blue, Danny Way gets a hold of me, and he had met this doctor who he'd been working with and said, "You've got to try this stuff called DMT, man." He said, "This is unreal." And Danny's a full-on fucking character. You know who Danny Way is?
No.
Danny Way is one of the top skateboarders in the world. He set 10 Guinness Book of World Records. He jumped the Great Wall of China on a skateboard, right? He jumped out of a helicopter 35 feet in the air and set the world record into a bowl out of a helicopter and shot back up into the air so high he almost ran into the helicopter again. But point being, Danny is a true fucking warrior that will face fear head on. And he said to me, and his brother Damon, who I also rehabilitated, he's another badass dude. And Damon and Danny were the key players, and Ken Block, famous race car driver now, owned DC Shoe. And so Damon and Danny had this experience, and they both said, "Paul, they didn't think I would do it because I thought I was too like health nut. But something inside me said, I got to go do this. So I went and saw this doctor and had my first DMT experience. And I had a complete union with the universe. And I just felt the love of God and the flow of consciousness and the bliss of connection. And it began a deep, deep healing experience for me. And it moved me so profoundly. I said, the power of this is something I've got to be able to share with people, because people reach the point that I'm at in their life and the world gets flat. And even with spiritual practices, even with meditation and all those tools, I needed something that could take me into a deeper sense of connection than I could get meditating half hour or an hour a day. And
so, I mean, this is a very controversial issue, right? And I think we land on the same side on this, which is, look, you're going to spend 10 lifetimes trying to meditate to the places and doors that are open for you by 8 psychedelic experiences.
Well, Terence McKenna says this very quaintly. He says you can sweep the monastery floor for 7 years or do one hit of DMT. It's your choice. And I don't want people to think that I'm saying, hey, pass DMT around like candy. It's the most powerful drug in the world, and I've known 6 people to die doing DMT. So it's not something to fuck around with and be foolish. And I was, by the grace of God, gifted with the opportunity to do it with someone that had the skill to guide me and give me the experience, who ultimately taught me and gave me the basis to become a medicine man, spirit guide, and do the work to create a safe structure for ceremony so people didn't get their heads all fucked up. But the point I'm making is that brought me into such a deep and more vitalized and rekindled connection with God that it began a very profound healing process. And it gave me a lot of meditation on what death really is. Mm-hmm. And, even though I had thought about this and studied it and meditated on it, I hadn't had an experience that was really like dying alive. And so it was really a very mystical, as you know, profound experience. And the thing is, having done, over 100 DMT ceremonies, the profundity of it, as you know, when you're in an experience like that, it's more real than this.
Yeah.
We're sitting here talking. I can touch you. I can share tea, smoke. But when you're deep in one of those things, it is not like you're having a dream where you're kind of semi-conscious or you're having it is so palpably real. It makes this seem like we're in a dream. And when I come back from those experiences, and I've had plenty of time to test this, I'm like, okay, our belief systems are a little outdated, and religions, had a long history of using psychedelics, which they carefully hide. But I got a whole section of books in my library going into this very deeply, which could be a whole conversation. But the reality of it is, mystics have known this. If you look at pictures of St. Hildegard of Bingen that she painted, there's fucking mushrooms all through the damn thing. She was obviously a magic mushroom lover, and the list goes on, right? So all I'm saying is, the experience began a healing process for me, an awakening process, and it helped me realize what ultimately I'm saying in answer to your question is these are dimensional gates, and they change our chemistry. And if you look at the book Stalking the Wild Pendulum by Itzhak Bentov, he has a diagram, and they're showing the range of human perception, and we're the only creature in nature that actually has the perception to go all the way up to the absolute and all the way down to the minerals and the atoms. We're actually equipped to make that journey up or down the ladder of being, or the great chain of being, however you are, Jacob's ladder, if you will. And so I think what happens is we get conditioned by our ego into this very, very narrow focus, like this flat landscape, right? This kind of like work every day, make money, what's
pay
on
the bills,
news.
Keep your responsibilities, go out on weekends.
This sort of like constricted world that strangles a lot of people. Rightfully, right? We're too creative to be trapped in that box. And if we don't do something about it, we get sick. One of the most common questions I get from my students is, Paul, how do you remember so much information? the first thing that I tell them is that when you're passionate about what you study, there's an emotional charge. That emotional charge imprints your memory very effectively. The other thing I tell them is that you have to have healthy digestion, metabolism, assimilation, and elimination, or you're likely to become too inflamed, low energy, have blood sugar handling problems, and cognitive challenges. Most people don't realize that all biochemical reactions in your body are enzyme dependent. If you want to try the enzymes and other key supplements that I use most commonly and recommend to my clients, then I highly recommend Bioptimizer's excellent products because they can help make positive changes for you very quickly, including detoxification and clearing parasites. I found no better source of excellent quality digestive enzymes and probiotics that are manufactured using today's cutting-edge science than Bioptimizers. Their Masszymes help digest the fiber in plant foods and make plant food nutrition more available to your body, while their Capex enzymes really enhance your ability to digest flesh foods and enhance mitochondrial function naturally. HCl Breakthrough hydrochloric acid product help digest proteins and kill parasites. Their gluten guardian enzymes will really enhance how you feel after a gluten-free treat or a gluten treat. Bioptimizer's products enhance how much energy you have and make eating much more enjoyable. Living 4D with Paul Chek listeners get a huge 27% discount on the upgraded digestion package consisting of 4 great Bioptimizers products that I use myself. Check them out at bioptimizers.com. That's bioptimizers.com/4 capital D capital L. And to get your 27% discount on the upgraded digestion package, use the checkout code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K 10. I hope you enjoy Bioptimizers as much as me and my clients do. And for an amazing learning experience, go to my podcast with Wade Lightheart, number 55, and listen to this guy. He's amazing, and I think you'll really love hearing the science behind Bioptimizer's products. Enjoy. But when you get, something that revs up your serotonin or your the various dopamines and other neurotransmitters to certain levels, it's like someone's opening the perceptive antenna of the conscious mind. The brain, to me, from my experience, has the capacity to reach any dimension. That's why anything you can imagine, you can experience, right? And how many times have we heard that from mystics? And so what I've found is that the different plants seem to be tuned to different dimensions. Like if you look at the psilocybin molecule, it's almost identical to the DMT molecule. So there's a tiny little difference. And
I knew a chemist who used to take psilocybin and push it into DMT.
Yeah, well, now there's this new thing coming out of Amsterdam called Ayahuasca, which is using Syrian rue coupled with mushrooms, and that makes complete sense to me. You look at mescaline, LSD, peyote, whatever it is, they're each sort of keys to different dimensions. And you read all the experiences people have had with aliens, all sorts of stuff on DMT. Now, I look at the things that people say about their experiences on DMT, and I go, well, I've never had experiences like that, but I bet you I've had a lot of experiences that they haven't. So what does it all boil down to? It's all vibration, but who's making sense of it? You are. So what does that boil down to? Mind.
Yep.
Mind.
Yep.
Not only what is it that you can believe or conceive, but what are you afraid of and afraid to experience? And I tell people, it takes a lot of spiritual courage to go into a deep medicine journey.
Oh, it's one of the most courageous things you can do.
You got to have billy goat balls. And that's why I tell people there's a real way to prepare, and you don't want to overdose yourself because you can come out of that thing a complete psychopath. It'll fracture your psyche. I've seen people do very dangerous things. And I've actually, like I said, I've known 6 people to die doing DMT. And the worst thing you can do is do DMT in a jacuzzi or a swimming pool because you forget that water is water and you try to breathe it because you're in such a state of bliss and then you drown. And I've known 3 people to drown doing DMT that way. But I've watched people reach these higher states of psychic opening and they lose complete awareness of what they're doing. And it's like they're totally unconscious. And it's almost as though they're running from a dragon or something in another dimension. So they'll run right through a plate glass window or knock your furniture over and hurt themselves. And when I was doing my training, this guy's philosophy was load them up and blow the ego out. But I saw a lot of people get in trouble and a lot of people get hurt. So I learned, boy, if I'm going to be involved in guiding ceremonies, I really have to study this, and I cannot have that attitude because people can get very badly hurt.
What is the cause of the amplification of reality that occurs in these experiences, right? There's an amplification, like suddenly this is more real than anything you've ever been through before.
Yeah.
It's closer to your reality. It's closer to your soul. It's closer in than this around us now.
I think it's knocking out our, the ego is actually referred to by some experts as an ideaplex, a collection of ideas, a network of ideas, just like a computer, right? The more information you put into it, the more questions it can answer. But it has to have the answer in a computer. Our ideaplex creates our perception of the world, of relationships, of what God is, what money is, what sex is, right? And that's
what our life is.
What everything is, right? But the medicines take you behind the ideaplex. And they tap you into the network of the entire universe, because if you think of it, if you look at quantum physics, everything's bubbling out of the 0 point field. It's frothing like foam on beer, and we're part of the foam. But the truth is, the greater truth of us is the 0 point, and it's in us. And Nassim Harriman says that every atom potentially has a black hole in it. So we're actually connected to source at every atom of our body. So what I think's happening is the medicines actually knock the ideaplex out, your framing structure.
Right, makes sense.
But because they enhance conscious awareness, as long as you don't push the person past the threshold where they just go unconscious out of complete fear and shock, which a lot of dumb shits do with those drugs, which I don't condone at all. I'm an ex-paratrooper, wild-ass cowboy motherfucker, so I've kind of faced death a lot of times. And so what I've experienced is that if you can stay awake as the ideaplex dissolves, then you actually find out that the reality that supports the ideaplex is actually the greater reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's the reality behind the ideaplex, right? That's basically, I mean, some of these great psychonauts like the McKennas and the Timothy Learys of the world, we're always talking about your ability to break down your framework, your position, your viewpoint.
That's the ego
and
structure.
See it differently. Yeah, the ego structure. Yeah. And so that's that in some people more like us, we're like, break it down. Let's what am I not seeing? Show me what's going on here. Where's my ideaplex limited?
And it's very limited.
But it's just a tiny little fraction of all of reality. But then this is interesting, in the overall spectrum of all human beings, and this is why psychoactive substances can be dangerous. There are people you cannot take that ideaplex and remove it without causing some kind of psychosis.
Well, one of the reasons I'm a therapist, right? I deal with people's problems is because traumas are actually so heavily linked into that ideaplex. And a lot of us are traumatized as children, very traumatized.
Yep.
I was.
Yep.
Right? I could, without going a long history, but I lived in a very traumatic environment, and went through a lot of pain when my father died.
Did your father die young when you were young?
My dad drowned when I was 8.
Oh,
and I didn't know what death was.
Whoa.
And you see, my mother and father had split up, and she was living with who became my stepfather. And it was pissing me off to see this other man touching my mother. And I'm like, nobody explained what it meant when somebody died. So, and there was a lot of physical abuse in the family. My real father used to beat the shit out of my mother. And, just there's a lot of stuff from my early childhood when the ego's got no filtration systems, right? You're wide open. So those become roots into the unconscious. So when a lot of people actually start dissolving the ego, the unconscious pours up. When you break down the default
ideaplex
network,
the parameters,
then the unconscious actually has no valve to protect you from it. So everything that's sort of retained and everything that's retained in your soul from past lives can come through, and there can be a lot of trauma in there. So some people actually don't get to the bliss state because they get anchored where their healing has to be done. And so they have what often is referred to as a bad trip. But in reality, often what is a bad trip is a trip of deep awareness of where you've got to heal so you can see the truth of yourself, because it's actually like a scar on your windshield or a scar on your lens of your eye. If you have a scratch in the lens of your eye, everything you look at has a line through it. So the medicines are actually very therapeutic because they will bring up everything that a person can't consciously access, and even doctors and therapists. Now, I use art therapy to access that because I can get amazingly good into the ego. Can't protect itself against art. So that's one of the reasons some people, they're just not ready to do plant medicines, and you have to be careful with all legalities and all that stuff. So I found other ways to do it that are safe for people, and art is one of them. But the answer to your question, in my observation, is it's traumas that we have that are like scar tissue, and the soul doesn't want you to venture out past that until you heal that. Because if you wander into other dimensions, and I've had a lot of these experiences where other beings who have done the work on Earth live, it's kind of like kids walking into mom and dad's bedroom in the middle of sex. It's like you don't want kids that exposed. And higher evolved beings really don't like little snotty-nosed earthlings hanging around who have weird contorted ideas that they needed to create the resistance to grow consciousness, but they ultimately have to heal. And if you read, you know who Fred Bell was?
Yes.
If you read his book, I can't remember the name of it. It's a huge book.
It was about that
It's
thick.
like 800 pages, yeah. And he talks about...
I remember he had a chapter called Minerals Are Required for Higher Consciousness in that book.
Yes, and I could go into a discussion on that, but the point is he talks about what he calls the ring past naught. And he says there's an energetic ring around the planet, and that no soul can pass through that ring until they've evolved themselves enough to become a citizen of the universe. So the earth is really like a schoolyard for souls, and we have to do our work to learn and grow. And it goes right back to what Jung said. He said all religious systems are designed to protect you from the direct experience of God. So what religions do is program with this polarity, devils, fear, hell, but those things become sort of the activators of consciousness, and it's our job to grow through to identify, is it really true? And only when we do the work to become conscious, and as you become more conscious, you learn how to work with polarity, just like the better an artist is, the better they work with the polarity of color, let's say. So an Alex Gray is like a highly evolved spiritual being that knows how not to make a mess out of a canvas called life, let's say. So when people have all this scar tissue of trauma and judgment and fear and bias, the ring past naught keeps them in the schoolyard, because if they get too far out, they can't really appreciate or understand what they're coming into contact with anyhow,
Right.
because their
They can't comprehend
contextual
it.
field is too narrow.
Yep.
So
That makes a lot of sense.
point being is what Jung was really saying is religions are designed to put all these polarities into, to give you all this shit to have to work with, because ultimately it's like going to a gym. If you go to a gym and there's no resistance there, how do you grow? Right? So we have to have mental resistance to grow our mind, and ultimately we become adults when we start questioning our own beliefs and say, wait a minute, is it really true? Would God, as unconditional love, burn you in hell when you are it? That makes for a dumb fucking God.
Yeah.
So when you graduate and say, okay, that's enough of this Abrahamic silliness, I need to upgrade to Buddhism or to Hinduism or to Vedanta or to, just being alone in the woods and meditating, or, any of the philosophies that get past the daddy figure in the sky that'll spank you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so my experience is that, and if you look at studies in consciousness in a book like Streams of Wisdom by Dustin DePerner, where they've done extensive research into this, they say things like, nobody who's a Christian has ever seen Buddha in a mystical experience. Why? Because their frame of mind limits what's possible for them to perceive. So what you see is someone who believes Jesus is the only begotten Savior never sees anything but Jesus. But God's much more creative than that, right? And as Jung says, when the Christians created Jesus, he cast a light so bright they had to create Satan to counterbalance him. And so there you see the balance of duality. For everything that you make good, you have to have something relatively evil or not good to counterbalance it, because otherwise you create an illusion. And you can't understand something as good unless it's juxtaposed against something, just like you can't know what north is without south or up without down.
So I want to get into this for a second about the polarities, right? So Steiner presents us something that is very interesting from a technological perspective, in my opinion. I want to get your take on this, because if you're familiar with the Oluid, and what was one of Schatz was one of Steiner's students who figured out how to create, what was his original thing? Steiner gave an indication of taking the 5 platonic solids and crossing them with the zodiac. And there will be a new technology that will come out of that. And Schatz, I think his name was Paul Schatz, spent years studying this, and he eventually came up with a mixing system that it uses kinematic inversion. That's what it's called, kinematic inversion.
Kinematic means motion,
but it inverts. So, for example, you take a kinematic inverter today, and it's going to mix a substance in 30 minutes, what would normally take 24 hours. Now, this is used in industry heavily today. Paul Schatz's ideas were eventually commercialized, industrialized, but originating from Steiner. I'll send you the videos of this.
A lot of things have been originated from Steiner.
You'll get a kick out of this. That eventually led to the shape of the Oluid. Now, an Oluid is an object that I can roll across this table, and every bit of its surface area will touch this table. It's like this. It's an object like this. This is circular, and then it fits into this circular, and they match into each other. You ever seen the object of an Oluid?
No, it sounds to me like a Klein bottle or a Mobius strip.
It's similar to a Mobius strip. It has a similar kind of material look to a Mobius strip. Now, this brings up this idea about what Steiner's saying about polarity is that you have your creative center, it's the golden mean, and then you have two evils, two opposing forces that are opposing the one in the middle. Okay, so this is starting to bring into my mind, I'm starting to go, this is driving towards a technological discovery about polarity.
Yes.
You see, you get the point I'm getting at.
Yes, I do, yeah.
Say 2 negative poles, 1 positive, or 2 positive poles, 1 negative. And so this is, in my mind, I just from rereading Steiner over and over again, I'm like, this is like it's a type of circuit. It's a circuit. I can see it as a circuit. I can see it as an actual technology. I just wanted to get your feeling on that and that idea there, because there's something there.
I'd have to actually study the material to grasp it at a deeper level than I can just hearing you talk about it. But there's a book right there. You see that book, Life Force?
Yes.
The Scientific Basis?
That's a good book. I have that book.
Okay, so Claude Swanson has like 800 pages of investigation on what life force is. And it talks, for example, and says there's like 6 or 7 different kinds of chi, and that Tai Chi masters have been able to do stuff that science says isn't possible, like magnetize wood or non-magnetizable objects. So the point I'm bringing to you, and the reason I'm glad you have that book,
that book is so good.
It's awesome. I read it in the sauna for years, and that's why I've got 2 copies, because I ruined one in the sauna. But the point that I'm bringing up is that when you read that book, it opens your mind to all sorts of stuff about polarity and things that mainstream science doesn't even talk about. But this is all scientific research that's swept under the fucking carpet.
Right.
It'll blow
It's
the
excluded.
mainstream ideas apart.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So I'd love to look more into that.
He gets into in that book, if I recall, he talks about the guy who was the guy he was a European nobleman who was into the ode. I think it was
vaguely remember. Most of my studies on Steiner have been related to health and disease issues. I mean, I've studied Steiner extensively, but when it came to things like philosophical dispositions on Ehrman and stuff like that, I always let my soul guide me, and my soul always guided me to Steiner's teachings on health and on healing.
Yes.
So I've studied, the energy fields and Steiner's approach to that and all sorts of stuff. But as you know, Steiner's very fucking deep. I mean, shit. I mean,
there's something there. It's almost like he's laying out a matrix, and he's like, look deeper, look deeper, look deeper. It's almost like the beings who are guiding him, or where he's getting his downloads from, or whatever hyperdimensional level that he was viewing from, is giving us indications. I mean, that's what these Steiner people say. They say he gives an indication of this, or he's talking about impulses of this.
Yes.
So that was one that I want to talk about with you, because there's something there it's been on my mind. It's been bothering bothering me about there's a circuit idea there. Instead of a net positive and a negative, like a capacitor, for example,
Yeah.
it's a triple capacitor or double capacitor with two negatives and a positive, or two positives and a negative, or something like that.
You know, if you look at David Wilcox's show on Gaia, which is like 250 episodes, he gets into all sorts of stuff with sonic geometry and materials that they've found that are not even from this world, and scientists are now creating materials with 5 sides and things that we didn't even know were possible. And there's a lot of cutting edge science that the average person out there is just totally unaware of.
So let's get into that. That's so interesting that there can be all these sciences out there. Like I was thinking of the guy, I think his thing was Ode, or whatever is.
I vaguely remember
And
that.
it was similar to Wilhelm Reich's orgone and negative orgone. It was a similar thing to that. It was also similar to the guy who was into the magnetism, the animal magnetism, Mesmer.
Mesmer.
It was a similar thing to that. And I think this guy was like Richtenbach. Anyway,
Reichenbach.
Yes, I have
books by him.
Okay, so this book right here kind of summarizes all of that. And when I think about the vastness of what science actually is, I think God is so great.
Science is an exploration.
It's an exploration. And I'm just thinking, all of this is part of our reality. All of this.
We're living in such a thin slice of reality, it's unfucking believable. I mean, that's one of the things that goes right back to, my midlife crisis. I needed something to expand my awareness and connection to the flow of energy, information, and love, so that I realized that I could get a lot more nourishment than I could get from books. And I have learned so much through the use of plant medicines. It's mind-boggling. If I had to stack up all the journal notes I have from my explorations with plant medicines and meditation and Tai Chi. And the thing is, and I tell people, look, the plant medicines, you're not supposed to get addicted to them and think that the only time you're alive is on them. They're teachers. What I've always done is when I've had an experience on a plant medicine of another dimension or going to other dimensions and meeting beings there, now I know it's possible. I just say, good, tomorrow I'm going back, but I'm going without the medicines. Because I'm a remote viewer, I know what's possible.
And you see that it shows you a door, like it's the door to love. This is something that the generation that came after me. So I'm 50, so this is the generation of maybe 35-year-olds right now, or maybe 30-year-olds who are the MDMA generation.
Yeah,
it opened them up to love.
Yes.
It opened them up to loving their parents. I thought, geez, that is such an interesting door that's been opened. And I do want to get onto that because all of these things can be maybe bubbled right down to love.
Well, love is the very basis of creation. I have a whole model of love that I teach my students. I spent years meditating on love, doing medicine journeys, asking for guidance on what love is. In fact, I have a painting I did over on the wall over there showing that code because God showed me that's what love is. In fact, since you brought it up, I believe I cracked what I call the love code, and I wrote a whole book on it, but I just haven't published it yet because it's every time I let my reviewers look at it, they said it was so deep they couldn't understand it. So I have to spend the time to take this 275-page book and refine it for the public. But L stands for life, and the L is red, which means positive polarity because life is a positive experience. So it's an explicate experience, right?
Right, yep.
In the implicate, the oak tree doesn't know it's alive yet. So L, life, stands for desire. We know that desire is the prerequisite for life because if you lose the desire to life, you'll kill yourself and then you are not alive anymore. O stands for zero or unconditional love, pure potential, source. VE, which turns out to be the exact scientific notation for volt electron, which is the electromotive force of the universe. And the electric universe says the whole universe is an electric universe, and it's a damn good system of thought. I've studied it a lot.
I like it.
And so in the love code, L stands for desire, the implicate, the yin, the drawing in force, the womb. O stands for the potential for all possibilities, and VE stands for will. How do you achieve your dreams? You have the will to do it, the intention, the awareness, and the will. When you couple desire with will, you get action. So what is love? Love is the code for God's dreaming itself into existence, for the implicate becoming explicate. And that is spirit. Spirit is that which moves from implicate to explicate back to implicate and is constantly informing itself. And if you study Fred Hoyle's research on the universe and you look at Goswami's self-aware universe, and I've got many books on that, Cosmos and Psyche, I mean, my library is full of this stuff. All the great thinkers have pointed out that the universe is a self-aware, sentient, self-growing, self-learning experience.
There it is, the self-aware universe.
Yeah.
That was his position in that book. I read that book.
Yeah,
I think that's the only book I've read by Amrit in this case.
It's Laszlo's position. It's Goswami's position. It's Fred Alan Wolfe's position. It's Ken Wilber's. I mean, the list of great minds that don't get near enough airtime because of people like Donald Trump burning the airways up with silliness is fucking unbelievable. Like when you see what I do is when I have an experience, be it by meditation or contemplative meditation or plant medicines, I then write it down, diagram it, and say, okay, now let me go do research and see if anyone else thinks like this. For example, when I had this experience of cracking the love code, I said to my soul, are there any other authors that have come to this conclusion? And the answer was yes. I said, is there anybody in my office, in my library that has this in it? And the answer was yes. I said, well, show me. Well, guess what? I was taken right by my soul to Richard Wilhelm's version of the Tao Te Ching, and in the back notes, he explains exactly. Then I found Michio Kushi's work, one of the primary founders of macrobiota.
Absolutely.
And he describes love exactly like that in there. And I went, holy shit, this is fucking unbelievable. How come nobody talks about this, such a fundamental understanding of what love is? And then I read physicist Jean Charon, a French quantum physicist, and he explains how electrons work, and he explains how they're actually sentient, and he goes into very elaborate explanations, and those explanations matched my love model perfectly. What is love? L, positive, proton, VE, volt electron, neutron, neutral polarity. Love, everything in the created universe is that we can weigh and measure is an atomic or subatomic structure, which is made of protons, electrons, and subatomic particles, all of which, except some of them like light, for example, light's said to be neutral polarity. It has no mass. So there's a trick for you. Light has no mass, but everything here is light in an entangled relationship with a self that produces mass. Why? Because inertia. So when you start diving into all this stuff, you believe, you come to the realization God's sense of humor is unfucking believable.
That's that thing we were getting into. It pierces, that galactic chuckle pierces through all.
It does.
And gets to the core of everything. So at some level, when I look at reality, I go, oh yeah, at the bottom of it is love, but also at the bottom of it is unconditional laughter. That's another thing too. That
you could just say the whole universe is God laughing.
Right. It's just, it keeps coming up. I'm like, this is such a cosmic giggle. You got to be kidding me.
But in all fairness, I've had deep, painful. I've cried for hours. I've also experienced the aloneness of God. And because God is the source of consciousness, God feels everybody's pain, every sentient being, everything in existence that has awareness of its own sentience, its own self. I have gone full into the collective unconscious, and I have experienced the pain of God. And so,
would you say that's the abyss?
I would say that it is the mind of God, but because the mind of God is what allows meaning to occur and experience to occur, that you can't have an experience without a mind to encapsulate it. You wouldn't know it was happening. So when you go, and this is one of the dangers of people using too much psychedelics for their readiness, you can go into the collective unconsciousness. And I've had experiences without drugs. I'll share one with you. I was in Toronto to lecture at CanFit Pro, and I think we had landed the day before, and I had a day off. And I just decided that day I'm going to do a Native American Indian meditation called Stand with the Tree, is the sort of one of the names for it. So I went and I found a park a block or two away from the Continental Hotel, which is right next to the, what do you call it? The conference center there.
Right. It's down by Lakeshore Drive down
Yeah,
there somewhere.
just right between the buildings, there's this little strip, and it's got some nice big tall fir trees, maybe 70 feet tall. And something inside me drew me to that tree, and I just leaned my back. And I've done many of these, and I just went into meditation and just went empty. And the next thing you know, I was in the back of an ambulance bleeding to death, and there was ambulance workers on me, and simultaneously I was getting shot, and I was in a police car, and I was driving the police car, and I was a nurse in the hospital, I was a doctor doing surgery, I was a woman just getting the piss shagged out of her and having orgasms, I was a man coming. I was everybody in the city of Toronto at one time. And I'll tell you what, the intensity of it, it was literally as though somebody had put a pound of C4 in me and it blew up. And all of a sudden, I was everything at once. And I was experiencing extreme bliss, extreme connection, and extreme separation, pain, sadness, and death. And I've had experiences like that on the medicines, but this one was very powerful. And because I've had so many of these experiences, I knew how to stay conscious and not let it completely annihilate me. And so I said to my soul, I'm having such a profound experience right now. I need affirmation that it's real and I'm not hallucinating. And my soul says, yes, how would you like to verify that? I said, where is Penny right now? Where's my wife? And so all of a sudden, I saw Penny walking down the street with a bag of groceries in each hand, and I watched her walk into the front door of the Hotel Intercontinental, and I watched her get on the elevator. And I said, okay, I got to go. And if I can confirm that that's what just happened, then I'll know I had a real experience, because these experiences can be, there's extremely schizophrenic, like you are blown out into everybody else's mind space at once, right? And so I go home and I literally jogged home. It was an intense experience. I got to find out. And I said, Penny, where were you? Did you just get home? She said, yes. I said, where were you? I was out shopping. Were you carrying a bag with a rope, like, the twine handle in each hand? Yes. There they are right there. I just put the groceries away. I'm like, holy fuck. So the point I'm making is it is actually only half of the truth to think that it's a constant laugh for God, because God is actually terribly alone. And that's why we have been created, so that God can experience love and companionship. And I have gone into the depths of the pain of God as well as the bliss of God, and those two are what make waves on the cosmic ocean. That is what drives it, because you can't have one of those without the other.
That's right. Right.
And I'll tell you what, man, I've done some crazy shit in my life, from being in mass attacks as a paratrooper and, having parachute malfunction and thinking for sure I was going to die because I'm dropping 4 times as fast as everybody else. And I got, we used to jump at 850 feet and training jumps at night with 750 to 900 guys at a time. And the least injury I ever saw in a mass attack was a broken leg, but sometimes lacerated livers and, really bad injuries, because it's very dangerous. And, at 850 feet, you got 1 second to figure a malfunction out, or you're going to die. Your feet is going to go through your asshole and out your top of your head. Racing, motocross, all sorts of stuff. I mean, I've looked death in the eye, and I'll tell you, entering into the collective unconscious like that and experiencing bliss and pain simultaneously, extreme happiness and extreme isolation and sadness, is an experience that is not for the lighthearted. It really isn't.
It really isn't.
It isn't. I mean, it could actually cause somebody to fully fucking crack up. And I think that's what happens when people, I've had many people come from all over the world who have gone to see shaman and just got overdosed with ayahuasca and all sorts of shit. And they're completely fucking scrambled.
Blew the circuit.
And what they describe is exactly the kind of situation that I've experienced. which is why I suspect Great Spirit's given these experiences to me so I can actually understand what's going on when these people come to me and say, don't worry, there's hope, and I've had to do a lot of grounding work.
That brings us on to this talk of mental illness.
Yeah.
So I want to get your angle on this too, because
I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
I know, but I've been wanting to ask you some questions for so long.
Well, this is fun. I hope everybody's enjoying it as much as we are.
So, when you look at somebody, on the streets of LA, I was just in Los Angeles. I'm seeing the homeless people on the street, pants falling off, the whole show, the whole situation. And I look at that and I go, this is so sad. So I see the traumas. Yeah. You feel the traumas, but you also feel the malnutrition and the genetically modified food and all this crap and the toxic oils.
It's sad.
It's sad. But then you also get this thing of like, this person probably did way too much alcohol, drugs, whatever it was, and blew their circuits. And it seems to be those three things, right, that is involved in mental illness. So there is definitely a component of it.
Well, you're forgetting the reasons they're doing those things.
For escaping the trauma. You think?
Medicating the trauma. Alcohol never complains whether you're a good kisser or a good lover or you're meeting your responsibilities. Drugs always love you at the level that you're at. So addictions are always attempts at safe love. And when you can't get the sex you need to feel connected, or your parents don't approve of you, or your internal dynamics are too far out of the box for society. All shaman were, out of the box, right? They weren't normal people. I've got great books right here by Joseph Campbell, and he shows you pictures of shaman, and most of them were transvestites, cross-dressers, hermaphrodites, gay, and Joseph Campbell and Mercy Eliade, they say the shaman never lived with the tribe. They always lived outside of the tribe, so they didn't get enculturated. Otherwise, it stops them from being able to access other dimensions because they get enculturated. So, what I'm saying is there's a lot of people in our world that actually are very, very tapped in, but they have no way of relating those experiences. And if they do, they get put on drugs or locked up because they're considered to be weirdos or they're told they're hallucinating. But the point that I'm driving at is that it's not just the bad food, the alcohol, and the drugs. It's the reasons. And the reasons is that the soul comes to the earth to experience everything because God can't know itself by only experiencing the good.
Right, or one thing, or
God's
one way of life.
God's willing to experience evil. That's the function of evil, so that God can experience all its possibilities, for better or worse. And people just don't like that. And it says right in the Bible. People don't want to look at the fucking Bible and read it. They want to cherry pick it for their own little silliness. Isaiah 45:7 says, I create the light and the dark. I create good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. And the Christians hate that so much. In the last 25 years, they've rewritten that passage in the Christian King James Bible, so it doesn't say that anymore. They softened it up.
Interesting.
Because they don't want God to be associated with the devil. And what the Christians don't realize is they create two gods when they create that devil. They think God and the devil are at war with each other. But the devil's job, as a metaphor, I tell people, Satan is God's reflection. Right? When you look at yourself in a mirror, you're seeing a reflection of yourself. But that one doesn't brush its teeth. But how many people have oriented their whole life around making the image in the mirror look better with plastic surgery, boob jobs, lip jobs, face jobs, Botox, and their whole day is ruined if that image in the mirror isn't just right. And that's God looking at God. So my point is, matter is the back of the mirror. So God comes into matter and it holds the two potentials, the light and the dark, because what is the darkness of matter made of? It's made of light. So they entangle around each other and you have the two halves of the mirror, the side that shines and the side that reflects. What I'm saying is God's as willing to experience the darkness of itself as it is the light of itself, or God's playing a very dangerous game and God can't even know what God is. And people, and I'm not condoning evil by any means, I'm saying, if you want to really get deep into God, then you got to be brave enough to go far enough into God to see what's in there. And what's in there is a lot of trauma and a lot of darkness. And it is out of the darkness that the light emerges. And oftentimes we have to, I mean, how many times in your own life have you made bad decisions with sex, money, drugs, relationships that ultimately turned out to be the very fertilizer that grew you into a more loving, more wise person?
It's always.
Right.
It's always. That's a Rumi phrase. It's the wound is where the light enters.
Exactly. And the shamans say the more trauma you've had, the more potential you have as a healer, because when you unlock all the energy trapped in the trauma, you can use that to support other people in
and
their
understand them and have compassion
and
for the situation.
Steiner and many great spiritualists say that as the soul matures from lifetime to lifetime, it takes on tougher and tougher challenges, just like a weightlifter has to lift more and more weights and a high jumper has to keep raising the bar. So paradoxically, the most advanced souls often come in with the most traumatic lives because they have that wisdom buried in their psyche that gets activated by these situations and gives them the choice to do the work to heal so they can become lights or guides to the rest of the people that are stuck at that level. And I had a really traumatic childhood. I mean, I used to stand in the field crying my eyes out, going, what? Screaming at God, why? What did I do to deserve this? You know? And as I started healing and growing, I came to the realization that God put me on this planet to go through exactly what I had to help people go through. And I've helped thousands of people in ways that I could have never done if I had come in with a upper middle class mommy and daddy that fed me with a silver spoon and gave me every toy I ever wanted. And when I cried, I didn't want to use the broom or the shovel or the axe or the post hole digger. I could just go play. No fucking way, man. My father raised us like full adults. From the time I was a kid, you get the fucking job done or you get your teeth knocked out, period. No discussion. Rain or shine, hot or cold, get the fucking job done. And as a kid, it was very traumatic, not to mention the violence. But now when I look back on it, and it was because of the stress of that I cracked as a kid and all of a sudden started having out-of-body experiences and ultimately realized I was doing what was called remote viewing. And so what I'm showing and trying to describe is that the ugliness that everybody keeps running from and medicating and numbing is actually the door, like you said, to the light.
Yep.
And my bigger point is all from the fact that you said God is really laughing. And I'm just saying, yes, David, God is laughing, but God's fucking crying with the same intensity. If you're crying, God's crying. When you're coming, God's coming. When you're winning the lottery, God's winning the lottery. But when you're getting tortured, God's getting tortured.
Damn.
And since God can't die, then you see, until we get deep enough into our spiritual development and understanding of what God really is, death is very scary.
Yep.
But when you realize that what you really are is consciousness itself, you are actually source itself, you are love itself, and love cannot die. It just recreates itself.
It's interesting. I was in the longevity field and have been in the longevity field for many decades now.
Yeah.
And interesting in that world, it kind of surprised me that, whoa, there's a group of people here that really are trying to evade death.
Yes,
they're
really
they're driven by the fear.
Yeah.
Which is, I always got into longevity because it's like, hey, that's the next thing. Like, let's just keep the party rolling. We're having a great time. Let's just keep on celebrating life and let's, keep growing. And, that's kind of always been my position. But then I came face to face with that, which I thought was interesting, which is a group that shows up because they don't want to die because they fear it. There's a fear underneath it.
That's right. And it's also an avoidance of the responsibility of being a real adult and a leader in the world. If you go through a midlife crisis and you divorce your wife and you buy a Corvette and you get two 20-year-old girlfriends, you're not evolving.
Mm-hmm.
You're playing a game. And the game is, I'm 24 now.
I'm
going to
to
pretend
24,
I'm 24. And I'm going to avoid the responsibilities of the challenges that are inherent in a real committed marriage. And any real committed marriage takes a lot of work. I tell people, you don't need a fucking church. All you got to do is have a committed love relationship and work through the problems, and you will find God, or you will kill each other, or you will divorce each other, or you will hate each other for the rest of your life, and that will stunt your growth.
So that right there, when you say that, I think of the divorce rate in America.
The average marriage lasts 2.5 years. The average person's married 3 times in their lifetime.
Wow, that much.
Well, you know what's a paradox is the Christians commit till death do you part. And so the Christian God must be very disappointed because the church is not doing a good job
of enforcing it.
Well, not only enforcing, but giving them the tools to make it through it. Psychologists say it takes the first 2 marriages to figure out who you really are and what you really need as a partner, and the third one's the keeper, and statistically it proves to be true. And I was married to my first wife for 17 years. I got a 40-year-old son from that one. Penny and I have been married for 23 years, and we invited Angie into our relationship as an agreed ceremony 8 years ago. So I have been married 3 times, except I just kept the last 2. And Penny and I entered into our relationship on the agreement that we love how we want to love, and we stay together as long as we want to be together, but we don't have any, religious ideology saying that we're going to burn in hell or any of that shit. When we honestly don't want to stay together and work through our problems, and we know it's time to go, and we don't want to hold each other back from finding true love. But Penny and I have been through hell together. She met me when I was flat broke and just went through a bankruptcy, and Penny built my business up from 0 to $2.5 million a year in about 3 years. And we've gone through everything together. And now we have 2 beautiful children, and Penny never wanted kids, but when they came, she said, I'll do my best, and the kids love her. And my point is there's mysteries at every step of the way.
There
but
really
if you
is.
give up and you drug it and you don't use the problem as the door to a challenge or an opportunity, then you just are on the wheel of samsara. You never grow. You never really figure out what God's really up to.
This brings us back into this idea of intention.
Intention is everything. Intention is what directs energy.
So you remember Castaneda's great stuff on intention from his books way back
Vaguely,
when?
I recently went through Arnold Mendel's book, The Shaman's Body, for the second time, which is fantastic. Have you been through that
No.
one? It's excellent. And it's loaded with Castaneda's teaching. So through Mendel, I've reacquainted myself. I did read through the Castaneda books piecemeal years ago. But I was so focused on, health issues and stuff, I didn't really give myself a lot of time to go into it. Plus, I'd spent time with yogis and stuff. So a lot of these things, I'd read the autobiography of a yogi. And so it was kind of like reading a story that I already knew the kind of undercurrent of.
Yep.
But when I went through Mendel's book, The Shaman's Body, which for all of you, I highly recommend. Arnold Mendel's a really tapped in dude. It reacquainted me with Castaneda's kind of teaching. So what was it that you wanted to share?
Well, it was the power of intention, and the way he talks about it as basically being underneath everything. And as soon as you set your intention, the connection, the light connection between you and that thing, that person, that love, that whatever it is, right, is underneath all.
It's instantaneous.
It's instantaneous. And so this is, to me, Rick, one of the most interesting things about our consciousness and our focus is it's an intention. You activate an intention, and the universe moves.
Well, I
The
can
world
tell you
moves.
something that you might find interesting. This is what I teach my students. The word intention means something very powerful. If God is unconditional love, by definition, there's no condition, and tension is a condition. When you use intention, you polarize potential into action. The word intention means to put polarity, to take pure unconditional love or potential and put it into tension, to draw forward. How do you pull a car? You put a rope into tension. When you put your intention into something, you activate the flow of spirit out of potential into actuality.
Okay, so this then brings up the next issue. This is kind of where I was driving at with this, which is one thing I've noticed about you hanging out with you is that you write things down.
A lot.
And I want to say this to
I
everybody.
diagram things.
I want to say this to everybody who's listening. This is a very interesting thing about you and about successful people that I've met all over the world in general, and who people are really engaged in their life, is they write things down. And this literacy piece of consciousness is really something interesting, right? Like, look at what you're showing me here. This is literacy.
Yeah.
These diagrams, this is literacy.
It's essential to make meaning.
Yeah. So let's get into that a little bit. I want to unpack that a little bit. Writing has a very deep something that's activating in the bubbling, frothing, infinite potential.
From my own experience, exactly what it is. Study metaphysics, study all the great minds. Creation emerges in 3 phases: thought, word,
then deed. Yep.
When you write something, the thought becomes word through the act of deed. Why I write things down is not only so I can symbolize them, because symbols point to something beyond themselves, right?
Right.
If I write the cat ate the rat and you're reading that, well, the cat's not on the page. You have to go beyond the word, the symbol CAT, and in your mind have to imagine the cat eating the rat. A symbol actually is a gateway to another dimension. So this is why I study symbology. And if you look at my paintings, they're loaded with symbols. So when we write, we're taking a thought, which is very etherical, right? The noosphere is very high vibration. Beyond that is the causal body, in which there's nothing identifiable. That's the seed that has no picture of the tree in it. So then we take the thought or the intention, and we put it into word, symbol, or form, but when we write it, we're using the musculoskeletal system, so it comes lower and lower. The thought triggers the emotion, so the cerebral cortex reaches into the limbic system to experience the emotion, which puts the charge on it. And then when you start writing, you're using the sensory motor cortex, which requires the brain stem, and it goes all the way through the muscular system. So now you're actually embedding what you're writing into the motor system. And now you are actually learning it at 3 levels. Our culture's trapped in its head. It believes just because it can say the words, it knows something. But I say, let me see your notes, and then let me see what you did with it. My students are forever come to me saying, I know that. Oh, you know that because you think you read the words. Go over there and demonstrate it to me. And hardly ever can they do it. I say, that's not knowing. Knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is power. And writing things down, and writing it down is only one step. The next step is, now what am I going to do in my life to put this to work and test it? Otherwise, it's just an idea written down. So if you look through all my notes, you'll see, try this on Mrs. Smith. Try this, turn this into a meditation technique. This happened to me in a journey. I got to do it without the medicines, and I got to do it every day for 90 days or a month or a year to really perfect this, so I can really trust that it works and teach it to somebody else. Otherwise, it's just mental masturbation. It's just come in a towel.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't go anywhere.
It doesn't go anywhere.
Just stick shit together.
Now let's take it a little bit further, because this is the question that I think people will think of next, which is the physical act of this, writing something down, going, okay, I'm going to draw this image, versus the computer act or the phone act. Where do you stand on those 3 options?
Well, the computer act and the phone act are still an act of intention because you're directing the creation of it. The difference, though, is that if you don't engage the material enough to bring it into your own cells, you see, to me, the memory system is water-based. But Greg Braden cited research showing, because, you know, the hard drive on the most powerful computers in the world, like the Cray supercomputer, is water. But the scientists were saying, how in the fuck can a little bundle of water molecules hold on to that much information? So what they found is that actually the water is connecting to a field, and that the water is the medium. Just like a symbol's a medium, the water doesn't contain the memory. The water molecule structure taps it into the field, and the field is what what metaphysicians call the Akashic record, which is in a constant feedback loop with all sentient beings. So it's constantly updating itself, and all the experiences are kept so that any one of them can access them consciously or unconsciously. The point I'm making is when I write things on paper or in books, I can actually work with them and hold them. But when I write it in my computer, I have to open it up, turn it on, and I can only look at it. But I can't meditate with it quite like I can. I don't get the same palpability. To me, it's like the difference between having sex with a woman and watching sex on television. There's an act of creativity that happens when I write things down or paint things that doesn't happen the same
on a computer.
Now, I'm not saying you can't learn, and I'm not saying the computer's not effective. I think in a lot of ways, it boils down to your personality type and how much sensory cues. To me, to touch, like when I paint, the color moves through me. If I paint green, I have a palpable inner experience that's different than when I paint with yellow or any other color. So when I'm painting, I'm actually creating light medicine so that whenever anyone looks at it, it has the same healing effect on them that my soul has given me. You can do that.
I think that's true of any art.
It is.
It's the feeling you have when you're creating the art that is then felt by the people who feel the art.
And you can do it on a computer too, but the point I'm making is that I'm 58 years old. When I was a kid, there wasn't even fax machines. I mean, I've watched the whole computer evolution come. I come from the era where my parents wouldn't let us have a television. My parents didn't get a television until last year I lived at home. When I was 16, I left, and it only got 2 channels and hardly ever did anything come in because the weather was so bad on Vancouver Island. So it was like fuzz all the time. You got lucky. You could watch, the BBC News. How fucking exciting is that? Watching everyone kill each other. So I come from an era where listening to a radio show or sitting by the fire and reading a book, and I hated reading, but I loved looking at pictures in books. So my whole psychic framework is more oriented toward the tangibility. And when I work with computers, and I do a lot, and I make a lot of diagrams, but I always build all my diagrams on paper first, and then I give them to my artist, and she takes that and turns it into something beautiful. But most people don't realize those things began first as a vision, second as a diagram or a painting or a drawing, and third, they ended up in a computer to become something in a course manual. So I think it's really, as the digital era has progressed, now we have a whole batch of people in the world that really aren't fireside readers and don't really value books. People send me books on PDF files all the time. I can't stand reading them. I cannot stand looking at a computer like that. I find computers very stressful to my inner self. I find that it takes me into a kind of a lower level of hypnotic thinking that's almost the opposite of enlightened thinking. I have to get off the computer to take the idea and import it into an experience that's more tangible for me.
Right.
But that might just be the software differences. So
yeah, it's just because it could be the age that you come from, right?
Yeah,
and the era that you come from. But I get your point, and I actually am more partial to your point personally.
Well, you're closer to my age,
and that may be why.
8 years younger than me. That's not that big of a gap. But I think what I'm saying is, I think it really boils down to the individual as to what works for their mental structure. But I know personally that when I work with a lot of people that are computer heads and business executives that are having challenges in their life, and I teach them to use paint and to draw and to use notebooks, that it has a profound healing effect that they don't get from computers.
Yes, yeah.
So
there's good research behind that.
There's something tangible going on. David, I'm having a fucking great time talking to you, man. You're a deep well, baby.
I love digging into this stuff, and I love being able to dig into it with people who really want to go there.
Yeah, well, it's my hobby and it's my life, man. I mean, like you and I were talking, the one of the most dangerous things about ideas is people believe them and stop exploring after that. They think they know, right? And I'm like, wow, that's dangerous. I describe a good idea like a funnel. The top end's got to be open to the cosmos, and the bottom, the narrow end's in your head, right? And I said to you, when Nietzsche said God is dead, that's because he meant when people think they actually know what God is, they've killed God, which in the language of symbology means you've turned a symbol into a sign. No one has a mystical condition and experience at a stop sign because they all think they know what it means. Step on the brake. But when you're talking about God or soul or spirit or the things we're talking about, we're just doing our best to encapsulate it within the framework that we can share through language.
I love entertaining possibilities.
Me
right?
too,
It
man.
just feels better than belief systems.
Yeah.
Belief systems and the cementing in of belief systems, we know from experiences how it's disturbed our own lives.
Totally.
Every one of us has had to overcome belief systems. We went, geez, I believe that. I was stuck in that. Wait, what? So even today, then you bring it to this very moment. You go, wait, I better not get stuck in any more belief systems because I know where that leads.
Yeah, it leads to a wall.
Right. I love the way you said ideaplex.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're stuck in this ideaplex, and it's like, it's so cool to be open to the mystery. And this brings us back to where we were in the beginning, which is this idea that you come from a place, there's an inner joy of the exploration that's within you, right?
It's the little boy.
It's the little boy. And that to me is also where I come from. It's just like, it's a constant exploration. When I look at all your books here, I'm going, this is the best ever. Oh my God, look at this. Whoa, look at that. And there's so much investigation and mystery going on around. But all of that has precipitated within you something that I want to get into next, which is psychic ability phenomenon, which again, we come from I'm thinking of the great Randy, or the guy who used to debunk psychics. And, so it was always there. Oh, it's just a magic trick, a materialistic thing that, we can explain how this is happening.
Yeah.
But we know that this is so much more, and it comes as a result of opening yourself up to all possibilities and then being in that space. And then you take me from there. Psychic impressions hit you.
Yeah.
Certain knowledge hits you.
Yeah.
You see a person, you go, oh, it's like the other day, this happened yesterday. I was working on a gal, and she had this crazy story about this thrombosis she had, almost died earlier in the month. This is it was in January. We're in February. It's a month ago. And I said, let me just come over here. I want to just work on you. So I started working on her physically, and I was like, whoa, this woman is in hypertension.
Yeah.
And then it hit me. Just boom. Her whole story, everything, her whole reality hit me of what's going on. All the traumas, the men that have traumatized her, the hurt. And it was just all there. And I was like, oh, she's lucky she didn't have a heart attack. Mm-hmm. She's lucky she didn't go down with a heart attack. I was like, you're lucky. But that's, these are the psychic impressions that come in that are so incomprehensible to our harmonic deception, for lack of a better word, the materialistic mindset, the hyper-rational thinking that doesn't allow I like the way you specify this too, the unrational, not the irrational, but the unrational.
Yeah. Well, the thing is there's a great book by Dean Radin called Real Magic, and he gives mountains of hardcore scientific evidence and statistical analysis on all psi phenomenon, and the odds are like 10 to 25 billion to 1 of chance. And so there's the scientific materialist mindset. They're like fundamentalist Christians or Muslims or any fundamentalist religion. Research shows that they're closed to any idea, even hard science, showing that their belief is wrong because a belief system by definition is closed, right? It's like the cooling system in your car has to be closed. If you poke a hole in the radiator hose, then the water leaks out and your engine overheats and burns up. So systems are closed because they contain energy. And so when at each level of our conscious growth or psychic growth, the one system that served us becomes a suffocating system, right? So the soul knows when we've gained what we came to gain from any given belief system or relationship or experience, and the discomfort that we get, which everybody keeps medicating, and the medical system makes billions of dollars numbing the symptoms of being caught in a belief that is not serving your own spiritual evolution. So, the reality of it is if you look at, there's a great book called One Mind by Larry Dossey, and he gives mountains of evidence, just piles of it. And I don't need to read the books. I read the books to confirm what I experience. Just like I said, I want to see what other great minds think. But the reality of it is that even if you go from a scientific materialistic point of view, where do you get to? You get back to the 0-point field. Well, 0-point field. How do you define zero? It's everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. One of my favorite definitions of God is that God is a sphere whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. Therefore, there is no location except every location. And the point of that is that zero, even in a rationalist, scientific, materialist point of view, is the origin of all that is measurable. And even in their own philosophy, it begins with the Big Bang, which is a complete fucking mystery that they totally pretend doesn't exist. So they built their whole foundation of objectivity on a massive question mark called a mystery. And that's no different than religion. It's a fucking belief system.
Exactly.
It's a religion. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because the same science used to investigate psi basically shows that there is only one mind. It's interconnected at the speed of now. Bell's theorem showed that there is action at a distance. Einstein tried to prove that it wasn't true, but he couldn't. Many scientists have proved it since. And so what do you find? You find if you bring two electrons into correlation, they interact with each other, you can move them to the opposite ends of the universe, and the instant you change the spin of one, it changes the spin of the other. Well, that goes beyond Newtonian physics. It goes beyond Einsteinian physics, and it says everything, right down to the elementary particles, is interconnected. So the point I'm making is, what I've found is that the most powerful thing that creates sympathetic resonance between people is love. I've had deep, intimate relationships with women in the past, and I have this now with my wives. But, I can feel when somebody that I love is in trouble. And countless, even my students and instructors, countless is the number of times I intuitively knew, or I got a vision or a deep inner knowing that somebody needed help. And I called them, and they would be like, how in the world did you know to call me right now? I've had people I've called, and they said, I'm actually just about to commit suicide. And this has happened to me many times, probably 10 times. And so what am I saying? When you really understand what love is and you make room for everybody inside of you, then you make room for God inside of you. And because there is no separation in God, I like when Arnold Paton says in his Universal Principles, any idea, belief, or action, and I'm paraphrasing, that creates separation between you and someone else or another being, an animal or whatever, is an illusion that is not congruent with the laws of the universe. And you must provide the energy to maintain the illusion yourself, because the universe will not support it. So when we live illusions like the Muslims are the bad guys, let's bomb the shit out of them, or vice versa, or any of this kind of historical religious crusades and silliness, or somebody treated you bad, so fuck them, they can burn in hell. You're maintaining an illusion, and it will ultimately burn you out and make you sick, which will bring you face to face with your own healing, or you're going to die, and then you're going to have to figure it out, and there where you have to come back to
sort it out.
To sort it out, because you realize it's just not true. And there's nothing more painful than lying to yourself and realizing it, unless you're just so unconscious that you're not even alive anyhow. Then we have to call you a zombie. And that's still part of the illusion that you're playing. So, what I'm saying, my opinion is that psi is well scientifically documented.
I agree.
Well documented.
Well documented.
It's just narrow minds that don't want to look at the truth, just like fundamentalist religions don't want to listen to what their own mystics are saying, and they're the most evolved people in their own religion. So if you won't listen to the master teachers of your own religion, then you have a deeper problem, and it's a personal problem, but it ends up being a world problem.
when I look at some of let's take it beyond the psychic impression of someone's about to commit suicide, call them up. Let's take it into the unrational.
Yes.
The
That is unrational because you don't know how it's happening.
Yeah, you don't know how it's happening. It's like, boom, there's the impulse, call them up. You call them up and boom, suddenly it's like the perfect timing.
Yeah.
Let's get to the thing of like, I was over at Uri Geller's house one day and he has a whole series of shelves like this filled with all kinds of objects. And I was like, tell me what's this object right here? He's like, oh, I was giving a talk in Berlin. That object came flying through the window, shattered the window, hovered in front of everybody like this and just fell on the floor.
Wow.
One after it was the craziest list of things. I was just like, what about that one? It was some other crazy story beyond comprehension. Another one. And there seems to be certain people in our reality, certain beings that are attracting, or they seem to be strange attractors for this level of the phenomenon.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
I have a few. One, most people don't think about this, but they think that just because everybody else has, 5 toes in each foot, 5 fingers on each hand, 2 eyeballs, a nose, and a mouth, that they all come from the same places. But souls, in my experience, having investigated this a lot, come from all over the universe and in different realms of the universe, learn different things, develop different abilities, and have different natural gifts and powers, just like we have great athletes and a Mozart who's a great musician at 4 years of age, and childhood prodigies and mathematical prodigies. Well, some of these souls are actually from other dimensions where things are very mathematically oriented or very musically oriented or very kinesthetically oriented. So what I'm saying is someone like a Uri Geller probably has multiple lifetimes where the mind was the body and the power of the mind creates psychokinesis, but then comes here to learn lessons about Earth and share the gifts of his lessons with others, i.e. becomes a teacher or an example of what's possible to others. But the rest of us who maybe aren't from those dimensions or don't have history in those dimensions look at this and think it's unreal or made up or that never could have happened. But, it's kind of like, the story of Jesus walking on water. Well, a lot of people would say you couldn't walk across burning hot coals either, but when you see people do it, you have to say, okay, wait a minute. My belief is limiting me. And people like Uri Geller and others are actually bringing us opportunities to see that things that we think aren't possible are possible. And we shouldn't be saying it's not possible. We should be saying to Uri Geller, how does that happen? Because he's the one likely to be able to tell you in this example. So I think that the answer that I'm giving you is I think that behind the body, which is really just sort of a costume that we're wearing, is the soul. And the soul can come from infinite numbers of dimensions and have infinite numbers of experience, which they carry in as part of the grand puzzle on Earth where we're all learning things from each other. And those things, I've astral traveled and remote viewed into many dimensions where I met beings that were really very different than they are here, but taught me all sorts of interesting things. And I've drawn pictures of them. And
have you ever ran into the praying mantis insectoid?
I was actually thinking about whether I should tell you about those. I had a very interesting experience. I was watching a movie with David Wolfe. I'm trying to remember David Wolfe, Corey Good. It was it's a documentary on Amazon that was really quite good. It's a fairly recent documentary, but they were sitting there watching it, and all of a sudden they showed the 3 most common classes of entities, and one of them was the insectoids. And I stopped it and said, Angie, come here, you got to see this. These are the beings I met on the sun. When I remote viewed and went to the sun, I met these beings that looked like 7-foot tall praying mantises.
Oh my God.
And they were the coolest and the most loving. And
yes, beings of pure love.
They were so trippy. Amazing. And it was wild because they don't even feel the heat of the sun. Like to them, it's just light. Their bodies don't react to the heat. Now, I'm there in spirit body, so it doesn't affect me either. But I was so amazed by them, I actually drew pictures of them in my notebooks and said, wow, these are the coolest beings ever. The look of them is a bit scary when you stand next to a 7-foot praying mantis. But so the point is, Now, what do you do when one of those beings reincarnates on Earth to teach us things that are necessary? Like right now, we have the crystal children, we have the indigo children, we have kids reincarnating. My own children, both. When Angie got pregnant, both of us did a ceremony to go meet their souls and say, why did you choose us? Because I did not want to be a daddy again. So when Mana came, it was a shock to me. The long story made short is both of the souls of our children said, we are coming to Earth because there's changes coming to the planet that can be very devastating, and it's going to be very shocking for people that aren't ready for it, and we have skills that are necessary to help people evolve on Earth. There you go. My children came specifically to be here to help in a time of crisis because they carry knowledge from past experiences, and some of them in other dimensions. And there's many, many souls coming to this planet that would have been considered extraterrestrials if you could have seen them in their previous incarnation in physical form. So do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is we are numb to the fact that we think everybody here is just like us. But that's very, very shallow.
Yes. I
Unfortunately.
agree. Yes. Now, this also brings me to the geographies of the Earth.
Yes.
Right? Because we're in this amazing, I call it the prime material plane. You know, there's so many possibilities, all this incredible stuff going on this continent, in this place, in this location.
Yeah.
So just like all of these different souls coming in from all these different places on Earth have all their different energies,
Yeah.
effects, histories, and impacts on our consciousness and our spiritual development.
Yeah.
So vortex points, power spots, places on the Earth. You're a world traveler. You're like me. You traveled nonstop for 25 years.
Yeah.
This is a real thing. Like for me, it's obvious.
That's for me too.
Let's bring that out. Let's bring that out for people.
Well, if you look at the research on consciousness, and Gene Gebser, who is a real primary researcher on consciousness, and Ken Wilber refers to him a lot, he describes the archaic dimension, but he links the archaic dimension, which is the sort of the ground floor level of our consciousness. When you look at how consciousness emerged in human beings over millions of years, it begins at the ground floor with archaic consciousness, which links to our intestinal tract. It links to the microorganisms in the soil, the earthworms. But really, archaic consciousness, as it's identified through researchers, comes through all the crystal lattices in the earth. And the percentage of the entire earth that's made of crystal is significant. It's like
20-something
percent.
Yeah.
So imagine look at Marcel Vogel and the technologies that we know about crystals and what can be done with them, that they're living organisms, are not dead stones. They're amplifiers of signals. We used them for many, many years in radios to tune into radio frequencies. I mean, most people's knowledge of what's really going on most things is pretty shallow. But a crystal is a conductor for energy and information, and it's channeling cosmic energy. Crystals remember, we're in a sea of vibration, and all the planets and all the stars are talking to each other all the time, and there's the internet idea is really someone's conscious awareness of an unconscious realization of what God's doing all the time, or the universe is doing. So what I'm saying is that the Earth is actually like a massive, massive radio station that's picking up the frequencies from unlimited dimensions, because what people don't realize is that the entire cosmos is a living organism. Just like we have 100 trillion cells each made of 100 trillion atoms, all working in amazing harmony, the universe is the same thing. It's God's body. And so the Earth is actually a place that picks up all the frequencies that are necessary for life to sustain itself and evolve into what it's meant to evolve into, which is in itself a mystery, but we know it's ultimately evolving into more and more consciousness of what the universe really is, because the universe is looking at itself through us. This is why I often quote St. Francis of Assisi, because people used to ask him all the time, how do I find God? And he said something beautiful. He said, what you are looking for is what's looking. Okay? Well, the point I'm making is the earth is God, and you could say it's like the pupil in an eye. It's the vortex of which, and the pupil is what's receiving the light, but you see the color around the eye. You could say that's the life forms in and on the earth that are using the flow of energy and information that's coming up from the archaic level of consciousness. And the reason it's archaic is because if the crystals and the stones had their own ideas, then we would lose free will. So each material structure's consciousness is limited to the function that it brings to the greater whole. So the crystal's function is to receive and transmit, but living organisms is to receive and express.
Right.
You see?
Yes, yeah.
So
take the implicit information and make it explicit.
Yes.
Yeah.
If they decided, oh, fuck this, I'm tired of sharing information, well, it would collapse the whole system. So the beauty of them is their function in life is to convey the information that ultimately embodies itself in form. And to to highlight that, I've studied the Aboriginal culture quite a bit in the writings of Robert Lawler, who's a beautiful writer.
Great stuff.
And Robert Lawler makes a statement.
What was the name of Before the Dawn? What's the name of Lawler's book?
Voices of the First Day.
Voices of the First Day.
Yeah, it's right behind you.
Okay.
But Lawler communicates an Aboriginal concept, and the Aboriginals are very tapped in, even to this day. They say you can kill the kangaroo, but you cannot kill kangaroo dreaming. What are they saying? If you go kill all the kangaroos on this planet, you will only kill the expression, the embodiment of the dream, but because the dream is the dream of the earth, it's dreaming kangaroos into existence, and lions and seals and whales and dolphins and humans and birds and bees and flowers and trees, that they will manifest anywhere the environment is right, because the information is flowing in from the mind of Gaia, which is also probably flowing in from many other worlds where there's kangaroos and everything else and other things. So the point that I'm making is the earth is really the dream body, and it is the stones and the crystals in the earth that are the conductors, or you could say the movie projectors, that create the energy and information that we embody. And Steiner talked a lot about
He did. This is like, he would call this stuff the astral realm.
Yeah.
Like you can get rid of all kangaroos, but you haven't got rid of kangaroo nests.
No, exactly.
It's in the astral realm. Same with all humans. You want to get rid of all humans? Okay, we're still there in the astral world.
And I've got great books written by a Steiner initiate on my desk. His name's skipping my mind right now because it's
the etheric is the. What was the two books? The Etheric 1 and 2.
No, this guy's showing Dennis Klochek.
Okay.
And his books are very good. They're very deep. But he actually shows looking into stones and like cutting into micro thin, and you look at it like a film slice, and you can see the forms of flowers and creatures. So the archetypal imprints are actually woven right into the stone. So just like you can cut open the seed, but you can't find the tree, the energy and the information moving through the cosmos enlivens the seed to become the tree. But Klochek is showing that we still are not really tapped into the fact that the stones are actually the seeds of life itself. So if you take the archetypal imprint of any of the organisms and you run enough energy and information through, you project it, and the light clothes itself in matter. And there we have us and life.
That reminded me of a Vedic phrase: God sleeps in stone, breathes in plants, dreams in animals, and awakens in man.
Yeah, that was actually stated by Rumi, but it was given to him by another Sufi master. God sleeps in the dreams in the minerals, sleeps in the minerals, dreams in the plants, moves in the animals, and realizes himself in man.
That's a good one.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay, so this geographic location then we're talking to people out in the world who are like, how do I get my home remediated? So I bring in those energies, those forces that can support a healthy life and a happy life, and get on that side of the equation of the unconditional laughter. Because that's really what we want to do, is we want to take our life, we want to say, look, this is the totality, but I want to position myself over here.
You do, but at the same time, that's like saying I only want to win whenever I play soccer or basketball. I think personally, from my own life experience and working as a therapist, the polarities of consciousness, or good and evil, if you want to give them names, if you go to any one side, you actually become unipolar. And so you don't really ever, look at the story of Adam and Eve. They didn't know they were naked till they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So they were with God. Therefore, in that parlance, they were with all the good. But they really had no knowledge of the fact that they were even naked. So they weren't very conscious, right? So what I really have learned from studying Taoism and Zen and Buddhism, those philosophies have had a great influence on me. And, I love D.T. Suzuki and a lot of the Zen writers. I mean, I've got amazing books full of koans, and I go into deep meditation because they really take you. But the point I'm getting at is, if you imagine a teeter-totter, so you got a triangle and a board, and on one side...
A seesaw.
A seesaw. On one side is David, on the other side is Paul. One of us will call the light, the other one will call the dark. If you get too into the dark, if too much of the weight goes there, the seesaw stops moving. If I go too much to the light, the seesaw stops moving. And the movement is consciousness, the flow of energy and information, which is what we need to awaken to the truth of ourselves. My dream, and what I try to teach my students, is to learn to walk to the middle. Put one foot on the side of the light, put one foot in the dark, and say, how do I use these together to create sustainable happiness that doesn't depend on me always getting my way, having a certain amount of money? How do I become conscious that the flow of the undulations of the happy, the sad, the good and the bad, the right and the wrong, the Dalai Lama on one side and Donald Trump on the other, right? But really, Dalai Lama stands in the middle. But so my point is, how do I grow enough acceptance and awareness to realize that the perfection is actually in the things that we often don't like, but it's only when we learn to go to the middle and get into the eye of the storm that we can see the dynamics at work. Look, for example, at fires. Like, fires are devastating things. They kill animals. They kill biological life. They scare the shit out of people. People hate them. But if you go back to Mount St. Helens or somewhere a year later, it's like, oh my God, it's more lush and more beautiful and more full of life than it ever was. So if you look at the fire and call it evil and avoid the fire, then you don't realize that Mother Nature's got a much bigger plan, and there's something like 2 million lightning strikes every second or something crazy on this planet, a lot of which starts fires. So, what I'm saying is, I've learned that if you get trapped on one side, you create an illusion, and you can't really understand the depth of what's going on until you look at the side you don't want to look at. And so you can take a coin. On one side is the positive, we'll call it good. On the other side is tails, we'll call it evil. But in the middle is something that's not neither, but yet positive and negative couldn't exist without that potential in the middle that has no identity.
I always think of the Twilight Zone episode where they flip the coin and the coin lands on its side.
Yeah, there you go. It lands right in the middle.
Right in the middle. Yeah.
And I think true freedom comes when you can stand in the middle and yet realize there's a time to get angry. There's a time to stand up for what you believe in. There's a time to grieve. There's a time to celebrate.
There's a time to pursue desires.
There's a time to pursue desires. There's a time to have wild, passionate, kinky sex. But then there's also a time to get out of bed and go to work and get something done. If you get caught in the drugs and the sex, then
it's one side.
Your life falls apart. And next thing you know, you're just masturbating with someone's body. The love is gone.
One of the teachings of Vipassana is equanimity, right?
Yeah.
Being equanimous,
Yeah.
where you sit right in the middle of that seesaw, like you're saying,
Yeah.
and you're just equanimous. It's like come great abundance, come great tragedy. You stay equanimous.
Yeah.
And that's what you're driving at.
Jung called it holding the tension of the opposites. He said, when your life's in a crisis, or you're scared because you think you should get a divorce or leave a job, he said, don't make that choice when you're heavily polarized, because often it'll be a choice that you resent. He said, hold the tension of the opposites. Let it work through you. Step above it. In alchemy, they have a saying called sublimation, which means to rise above. So because I teach alchemy and I develop my own system of alchemy, and so when my clients are stuck in a position like that, they often have their nose too close to the screen to see the big picture. So in alchemy, in spiritual alchemy, they say use the principle of sublimation, which really comes from gases rising. So when you refine crude oil into gasoline, you see these big giant tubes. That's because the gasoline vapors rise up, they sublimate, and they distill out. Making alcohol, you distill it out. So what I tell my students to do is climb to the highest place. If you can get on the roof of your house, go sit on your chimney and meditate on your problem and look at it as though it's on the ground, so you can see your husband's or your boss's point of view and yours, but be brave enough to be detached from your view, or you'll never actually get out of the one-sidedness. Go to the top of a mountain. To get as high as you can, because it's a symbolic representation of rising above so you can get a bigger view. So I think
that's an interesting tie back to the geology and geography, is getting to the tops of mountains, getting a viewpoint, a higher viewpoint. But this is interesting. I think it's just something that's tempered with time and wisdom, is that when you have a strong and important decision to make, wait, meditate.
Yeah, that's holding the tension.
Yeah. That seems to me to be one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my life. Like, everyone's always calling me, what are we going to do now? We're going to wait.
Yes.
We're not going to do anything.
That's called growing up.
That's how I feel about it, for sure.
Yeah.
It's after a while, all the chaos, you know how it is in life. Eventually the chaos doesn't affect you like it did when you're younger, right? And you just sit back with it. You're like, okay, this is happening, that's happening. And let's just wait. We don't need to do anything.
Well,
Let's sit in it.
There's a kind of a cute little story that encapsulates this. It's you'll get it. Hopefully, no one will get offended. But this young bull walks up to his papa bull, who's the big, huge bull. He's standing on top of the hill, and the big bull says to the little bull, he goes, "Look down there." And the little bull says, "Oh my God, Papa, look at all them heifers." And he looks at his dad, he goes, "Let's run down and screw one of them." And his dad looks at him, he says, "Son, let's walk down and screw them all." So you see, the young guy, he's too in a hurry to get a little piece of ass. But Papa says, "No, save your energy. You're going to need it. We're going to have all of them." And so sometimes when you're too youthful, you think you have to act quickly to get what you want, but you don't realize if you just went slower, held the tension of the opposites, then Great Spirit delivers you something much bigger. And only then in your maturity, you go, wow, I'm sure glad I didn't rush to make that decision or rush to divorce my husband. And a good example, I've coached a lot of people that have gotten in a flash, turmoil with their partner, or one of them had sex with somebody else and they said, "That fuck you, I'm leaving," blah, blah, blah. And then a year later, they realize they're deeply in love with that person, but their partner's now found somebody else. And then the pain really comes, because you see, they thought they still had them. They thought that their partner was going to play this little game with them. And so if they would have just slowed down a little bit and got some good marriage counseling and found out what their partner's wants, feelings, and needs were that led to the need to get sex outside of the relationship, that would be holding the tension of the opposites. That would be the daddy bull saying, "No, let's not run down. Let's take our time here, because there's a lot more available by taking our time." And so when people make snap decisions, they often find that they close more doors than they open.
One of the great benefits of meditation, in my experience, tell me if you agree, is that you can sit inside the chaos of that tension of opposites without reacting. So, when you're saying this, I'm thinking, oh, this guy's a meditator. There's no question. This guy meditates. That's something to me that really is a great benefit of meditation, of being able to sit in the chaos. We often hear, I'm going to meditate because I want to get to samadhi.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really the benefit of meditation?
That's already limiting you right off the bat. First of all, how do you get to everywhere?
Yeah.
Show me, which way are you going to go? I mean, where's the map for that one? So the intention of doing that is already showing you that you're worse than the little bull, and you just don't understand meditation. Speaking of which, you've mentioned that you have studied some of Arnold Mendel's work. I've got a collection of his books here: Quantum Mind, The Quantum Mind and Healing, The Shaman's Body, Process Mind, and Dance of the Ancient One. I've studied them all. And one of the beautiful things Mendel brings up is people avoid chaos because they're afraid of it. But he says it's important to remember not only did the whole universe come out of chaos, but chaos is full of information.
Yes.
So if you run from chaos, you run from opportunity and possibility. And Jung's concept of holding the tension of the opposites is, and the alchemist said, don't drug your depression, sit in it. They called it cooking. Cook in the emotion. Let it work through you. Be patient with it. Taste it, smell it. Because inside the chaos of depression or anxiety or fear is a tremendous amount of information that's got a great potential to wake you up to something much more profound and more powerful. But if you let your fear be what guides you, then you fall into the trap of false evidence appearing real, meaning fake fear. But, like I've been in situations where my wife's come to me and said, we need $30,000 to make payroll in 3 days. And I'm like, oh, fucking great. Let me see. How do I treat 42 people at once kind of thing, And I've gone into meditation and said to my soul, I need help. And somehow, some way, the money comes. Maybe I might say, okay, I've got a great idea I'd like to share, maybe alchemy or something. Let's start an online program. And all of a sudden, 50, 60 people sign up, and I not only have 30,000, I have more. And so if I let the fear take me over, then we would have gone out of business. But if I sit with it and ask God for help, and to ask God for help, I find the thing that you got to do is you got to make sure you're acting from your heart with the honest interest of everybody involved. But if you're asking God for help out of a selfish motive, you're probably going to start questioning whether God is real or not, because God's going to say, no, that's not the principle that the universe works on. Selfishness has limited shelf life.
Well said. I saw somewhere in your house here James Glake's Chaos book. And I think that was one of the first books. So I thought it was over there somewhere.
It could be. I got a lot of books on
there.
chaos.
It is. Yeah. It's right there. In this book, he talks about the implicate order that's found within chaos, right?
Yeah.
And then the chaos that's found within order. Yes. And so this is another good example of what we've been talking about the seesaw.
Yes.
Chaos and order. But some order is always having some chaos, and some chaos is always found in some order.
Look, everything that you think is ordered is decaying, right? I tell my students, if you put a steel fence post in the ground that's brand new and come back 1,000 years from now, you won't find a fence post. If you're lucky, you'll find rust particles, iron particles, or whatever. But you're not going to find a fence post. So all the things that you think are so permanent are impermanent. Remember, diamonds were once liquid because they were melted by the heat of the sun or
volcano or whatever, pressure or whatever.
So everything that you think is permanent is actually decaying right in front of you, but your perceptual systems are too narrow. But if you get deep enough into meditation, you see everything's just light dancing and buzzing. And as soon as God's dream changes, everything changes.
Okay, so now this is going to guide us into something I wanted to get in with you, and I think this will be our last subject to tap into.
I'm going to get myself in trouble because it's 20-7.
Okay, so let's make this the last one.
We'll do one more exploration. My interview has turned into one of the most fun conversations I've had in years. So you and I have to get together more often just to talk and record it.
This is something that over the years it just keeps coming back to me about. You mentioned it earlier. God creates something from nothing.
Yeah.
And when I think about that, I said, okay, there's energy. It's being bled into this dimension from nowhere.
Yeah.
Right? From God.
Yeah.
And so when I look into our sciences, when I look into our mathematics, when I look into chaos theory, I see it.
Yeah.
It's called the irrational number.
Yes.
3.141592653589799, and it just runs on and on.
Yeah. So are you using an irrational number or the imaginary number?
In my case, I'm using an irrational number
because
so
like a
because it
Fibonacci
iterates
spiral
forever.
or
yeah,
which is what chaos mathematics is based on.
Yes, exactly.
And weather patterns.
Now, the imaginary number, I haven't thought about that in a long time. So I want to touch on that if you've got thoughts about the imaginary number. But the irrational number continues to iterate. So to my mind, I look at it and go, oh, this is how energy is bleeding into this dimension. For example, the sun and the moon's movement over the earth is irrationally related. They don't exactly sync up. It's not a perfect thing. It's like it's slightly off, and the moon's slightly off, and they don't exactly sync up. So we get the different days, the different astrological coordinates, the different astronomical coordinates that affect all life, and the stars are in the same way. For example, the stars turn 1 degree every night, and so, but we have 365 days or close to that.
Yeah,
but it's not exactly 365 days.
No,
because we sit on irrational numbers.
And even Rupert Sheldrake showed. He researched this, that the speed of light is not a constant.
It's not a constant. It changes.
So there you see the fluctuation. But if you read The Spiritual Universe by Fred Alan Wolfe, which is a fantastic
That's a very good book.
So he talks about the concept of dukkha, which is a Buddhist concept, but it means imbalance. In actual...
this is what I wanted to get into.
In the root language, it means the axle that's loose. So the wheel is a little sloppy. But Fred Alan Wolfe describes that the imbalance is absolutely necessary or nothing would move, because if God's perfection by definition doesn't move, so there would be no life. So what you're describing correlates to Fred Alan Wolfe's use of the concept dukkha, which means the necessary imbalance without which life would not change, flower, and grow, because life is a perpetual process of evolution. And so without dukkha, there would be no movement.
That's exactly the thought form that I was getting after. The irrational number provides the movement.
It provides the movement.
The dynamic instability in the system that keeps the whole thing moving.
Yeah, and even in if you get into the deep Hindu philosophies, and talk about the chakra system. I got many, many books on it all over the place here. But the Hindu sages said, don't be fooled by the concept of 7 chakras, because every chakra has 7 dimensions, and every one of those dimensions has 7 more dimensions, and that goes on infinitely. You understand the point? So there's your irrational number. You think there's 7 chakras, but within them there's 7. Within those there's 7, and that goes on forever. Forever.
Yeah.
Right? And so there you have the interpenetration of dimensions, or worlds, if you will. And in his book, Finite Infinite Games, James Carr says a world exists anytime there's spectators. So we're looking at all this stuff, which means we can not only create worlds. There's not only worlds that we're finding, but there's worlds that we're creating, because every time you use your imagination, you become a spectator to your own thoughts and to your own visions. And wherever you put your intention and your awareness, if you couple that with love, then look at, how did we get the iPhone? How did we get, Orville and Wilbur Wright's airplanes and Henry Ford's car. These are all things that started off as visions that were energized into reality.
Yep, and points of focus.
Yeah.
And next time we talk, I want to get into those things that exist at the edge of our perception that attempt to avoid our perception.
Yeah. And
that stay at the outer boundaries of our perception.
that's very heavily addressed in The Shaman's Body by Mindell, by the way. That exact concept. It's called second attention. And that's really what a shaman or a healer or someone that's much more aware of the interpenetration of multiple dimensions. When I see disembodied souls, I see them with my second attention. Once I catch them in my second attention, then I can use my third eye to capture them and focus on them like I'm looking at you sitting here. But they don't show up in my plain ordinary sight because that sight's tuned to, the rods and cones are just tuned to the narrow frequencies of the rainbow or the frequencies of light that we can see. But our second attention, because our body is actually a quantum processing system, we're actually in touch with a myriad, almost infinite dimensions. But so we have to use the voyances and having studied a lot of Steiner and the etheric field, the etheric field's created out of the energy that's produced by the biochemical reactions within our body. So just, what I do to show my students is I say, okay, look, here, take a pendulum and douse the energy in a bowl of water. Or if you're sensitive enough, just put your hands around it. And I'll say, okay, well, I feel this or I feel that or I don't feel much at all. And I say, okay, now watch this. And I take a teaspoon of sea salt and drop it in. And the instant that salt hits the water, the energy just booms and the pendulum will start swinging like crazy. The point I'm making is that our cells are, as according to Nassim Haramein, are processing 30 billion biochemical reactions a second. Now imagine how much chemical energy that is, and energy is frequency. So just like you can have an antenna on a house, or like I have on my house to pick up the internet because we're too far out we don't have a hard line here. We have to have it come by frequency, right? It's being beamed at us. When you have a standing wave like the Schumann resonance, it becomes an antenna system, but it becomes a light-based antenna. So I think our cells, which we call our etheric body, our astral body, our lower mental, our higher mental, and our causal are all standing waves that access dimensions that are beyond our physical senses, but are actually penetrating in. And when you look at the chakra system, like William A. Tiller's work, he shows you that we have a chakra at each level. We have a chakra at the mental level, which is the highest vibrating, which is stepped down by the astral, which is stepped down into the etheric, which steps down into the meridian system, which steps into our glands and organs. So right in our own body, there's solid. William Tiller's a famous scientist. This is not a fluffy dude. He's showing mathematically that light in every one of these dimensions moves faster and faster and faster, and multiples, like light in the chakra system can be moving many, many times faster than physical light that we see with our eyes. But what I'm really driving at is that the chemical interactions of our body are interfacing with the subtle energy fields because they're creating standing waves. And that's why I think health is so important. Because if your health is not good, then your physiology becomes unstable, which is like somebody who keeps changing the channel or turning the knob on the radio. So you lose connection to the things.
You're out of the standing wave.
You're out of the wave. The wave becomes unstable. So it's kind of like watching a TV that keeps crapping out or a phone that you can't hear a clear reception on. You can't make heads or tails of it. So if we don't keep our body healthy, our biochemistry starts to break down, which means our interface with the subtle dimensions or our connection to the universe breaks down. And one of the side effects of that is a complete sense of isolation, which is one of the biggest problems we have in our youth and people all over the world today.
Right.
And it's not just the use of cell phones. It's the fact that they're not only disturbing their energy fields with those frequencies, but their health from eating crap, processed food, shitty water,
Yep.
not
just
breathing,
anxiety
not moving.
just goes up, up,
So
up,
they're
because of
actually
isolation.
disconnecting from the matrix of Gaia.
Yeah.
And the matrix of Gaia is the nexus point that connects us to the entire fucking universe. Aho, great spirit.
Oh,
Awesome.
that was awesome.
What a great share, man. I swear you're a lost soul brother, man.
Totally. I knew when I met you, I was like, this guy is on to the same stuff. Like, what is like your library, what you're into, how you spend your days.
Yeah.
It just was like, you'll see when you get to my house, you're going to be like, what's up with this dude?
Yeah. Well, I'll probably say, oh, there's my brother's house. Soul brother. What a great time. Hey, David Wolfe, man. You know what? No matter what the hell they say about you out there, you're the real deal, man.
Thanks, man. Likewise.
Yeah,
likewise.
Yeah, they call me a cult leader and every other fucking thing, but I always say, well, if I'm a cult leader, I'm doing a shitty job because I teach people to take responsibility for themselves, make their own choices, and not get trapped in belief systems. So I really fucked the cult thing right up. But hey, lots of love. And where can people find out more about you? And, you have a shitload of great articles on your website. You have products. You got a lot of great stuff. So where do people find you and your products and more about you or your workshops or whatever that, kind of stuff that you'd like to share?
The vortex that brings it all together is just davidwolfe.com, WOLFE.
Yeah, that's very simple.
Easy to remember. And then from there, I like to do different things. I do different social medias and different stuff for different audiences.
Yeah.
Because that's my art. I'll do like my Instagram is completely different than from Facebook. Then I do a Telegram feed. I do this feed over here and this. I do all different kinds of outreach, email, and in every one I try to do something different.
Yeah, great.
It makes it fun and I like to reach different types of people.
Check David Wolfe out, man. This is the second time I've got to spend time with David, and we've had a great time both times. And he brought some beautiful tobacco that he grows, and he's really into organic and biodynamic farming. He's got a beautiful place in Hawaii where he grows all sorts of stuff. And like he said, right from the time he was a kid, he was Johnny Appleseed. So he's got a lot of deep wisdom. And like he said, he's not fixed on any diet philosophy, but do what works for you. And that's my philosophy right on the bullseye. So you've just heard probably close to 3 hours of me and David just making love together. And there you go. You can have sex with a man in public and it's okay.
That was a lot of spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical interaction of many different layers of consciousness and research. And I was thoroughly enjoying all of that. And thank you so much. That was so cool.
Thank you for asking me the questions that I rarely ever get asked, but think are very, very important for people to hear about. You know how interviews are. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into this? Blah, blah, blah. It's the same shit over and over. But, I must say when I get together with Aubrey Marcus, he's pretty good at getting to the deep stuff. If I get to Kyle Kingsbury, he's pretty good. But I think, you're right up there with the big boys of pulling out the juice out of me. So,
right on. Cool. Thanks.
I'm looking forward. And just for all of you listening, I have 16 questions that I intended to get to with David, but we started having so much fun. I said, I can't get off this surfboard. And if I'm having fun and he's having fun, well, we're hoping that you had fun. So I will set up another interview with David and we'll talk about things more at the ground level for an hour or so. All right. Lots of love, David. Thanks for sharing.
Cheers, everybody. Thanks so much.
Let's do it again, and many blessings in your journey, and stay in touch.
Appreciate that.
If you guys love this, share it. If you didn't, keep it our secret. Lots of love. Bye-bye.
Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, David Wolfe. You can follow David on Instagram or Facebook at David Avocado Wolfe or on his website, davidwolfe.com. That's Wolfe with an E at the end. Follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living4D Podcast or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/Living4D with Paul Chek. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and at the Chek Institute's new streaming media site, chekiva.com.